I watched the man I was supposed to marry in 3 weeks pull his hand away from mine, look me dead in the eye, and ask what I did with my son. A son I did not know I had. My name is Rebecca. I am 31 years old. I manage a healthcare clinic in Minnesota, a job where I fix broken schedules, smooth over insurance disputes, and keep crises contained. I spent my entire life keeping the peace for my family, sweeping their dirt under the rug so nobody had to look at it. But sitting across from Nathan in that dimly lit steakhouse, listening to the low hum of jazz and clinking silverware, I realized the dirt was finally burying me. Before I tell you how my own parents orchestrated a lie to steal my fiancé, I want to ask you a question. How old are you, and have you ever had the person you trust most look at you like you are a monster? Tell me your age in the comments right now. And if this story resonates with you, please hit subscribe. Welcome to Zara Told Stories. Let me take you back to the exact second my future shattered. Nathan Reed maps crop yields for agricultural tech. He is a man built on predictable data, steady routines, and Midwestern warmth. Every dinner we ever shared ended the same way. He ordered coffee, poured in a heavy splash of cream, and reached across the table to hold my hand. Tonight, the waiter set a porcelain cup down. The liquid inside was pitch black. Nathan did not reach for the sugar. He did not reach for me. He just stared at the dark surface, his jaw tight, breathing in slow, measured counts. The silence stretched. Condensation gathered on my water glass and dripped onto the white linen tablecloth. I tried to bridge the gap. I brushed my fingers against his knuckles, asking if the office had thrown a late project his way. He withdrew his hand. It was a calculated retreat. He crossed his arms, leaning back against the leather booth, putting physical distance between us. Before I could ask another question, his phone vibrated on the table. The screen lit up. I glanced down and saw a text message notification hovering over the lock screen. Beneath the text bubble was an image. It was a photograph of a young boy, maybe 8 years old, with sandy hair and a gap-toothed smile. I leaned forward, studying the screen. I asked him who the child was. Nathan snatched the phone. He turned it face down on the table with a sharp crack that made the couple at the next booth turn their heads. He did not yell. The quietness of his voice made the words cut deeper into my chest. "You tell me, Rebecca," he said. "What did you do with him?" My pulse kicked against my ribs. I asked him to explain, telling him I did not understand, asking whose child we were talking about. He let out a harsh, dry exhale. He shook his head, looking at me with a mixture of pity and disgust. "I thought you were different," he whispered. He did not wait for my defense. He did not ask for my side of the story. He stood up, dropped a $50 bill onto the table, and walked away. I sat frozen under the chandelier, watching the broad shoulders of the man I loved disappear out the heavy oak doors into the cold night. He left me sitting there with an accusation that defied all logic. 10 minutes passed before I could force my legs to work. I walked out into the biting wind, the city lights reflecting off the dark Mississippi River, blurring in my peripheral vision. I functioned on pure autopilot, desperate to reach my car and find some anchor of normalcy. I unlocked my sedan in the concrete parking garage. My hands shook as I gripped the steering wheel. I reached into the back seat to grab my wedding planning binder. It was a thick, leather-bound folder where I kept every vendor contract, seating chart, and receipt. It was my survival guide for the upcoming 3 weeks. My fingers met empty upholstery. I turned around, checking the floorboards. Gone. I sat in the freezing car, staring at the empty seat. I did not realize it then, but that missing binder held far more than floral arrangements. It contained the old addresses, banking passwords, and financial records my family needed to execute a flawless betrayal. The trap had already snapped shut around my ankle, and I had not even heard the spring. To understand how a thick leather binder vanishes from a locked car and how a man I loved turns into a stranger over a single cup of black coffee, you have to understand the operating system of the Clark family. We are native Minnesotans. From the outside, my family projects an image of pristine Midwestern hospitality. We bake casseroles for sick neighbors, maintain flawless front lawns, and wave at the mail carrier. But inside the walls of my childhood home, there was a strict, unspoken caste system. At the very top of that hierarchy sat my younger sister, Alyssa. Alyssa is 28 years old. She works a job she invented for herself, calling it lifestyle brand curation. In reality, she posts filtered photographs of her manicured hands holding iced lattes and tags companies hoping they will send her free lotion. She is the family show pony. Her entire existence is built on being admired, shielded from consequence, and kept pristine. I am 31. I am the clinic manager. I am the draft horse. My role in the family was established early and enforced brutally. The workhorse pulls the weight, fixes the broken fences, and never asks for applause. The show pony gets the ribbons. If you want to know how deep this dynamic runs, I can trace it back to a freezing Tuesday morning during my junior year of college. I worked the graveyard shift at a regional hospital records department to pay my tuition. I spent my nights breathing in the smell of sterile alcohol wipes and stale break room coffee, entering billing codes until my vision blurred. I paid my university fees in tight monthly installments. I lived in constant, quiet terror of missing a payment and losing my seat in class. I never asked my parents for a dime, because I knew the answer would be a lecture on fiscal responsibility. 2 years later, Alyssa entered her sophomore year at a private liberal arts college. She changed her major 3 times in 2 semesters. She dropped her science requirements because the early morning labs clashed with her social schedule. One Saturday, I drove to my parents' house for dinner, wearing faded scrubs and carrying a bus pass in my pocket. I walked up the driveway and stopped dead in my tracks. Parked on the freshly swept concrete was a brand new silver SUV. A massive red ribbon sat on the hood, catching the afternoon sunlight. My parents, Susan and Gary, stood on the front porch beaming with pride. Alyssa was jumping up and down, clutching a set of shiny keys against her chest. I walked up the steps, the exhaustion of a 12-hour shift sitting heavy in my bones. I asked my father what the occasion was. Gary clapped his hands together. "Your sister needs reliable transportation for her new unpaid internship," he said, his chest puffed out. "We could not have her waiting at bus stops in the cold. It just is not safe." My mother, Susan, smoothed down Alyssa's hair, looking at her like she had just cured a disease. "She works so hard," Susan added. "She deserves a little comfort." I stood there in my cheap shoes, my feet aching from standing on hospital tile. I looked at the silver paint on the new vehicle. I looked at the bus pass sticking out of my pocket. I did not scream. I did not throw a fit. The workhorse does not get to complain about the saddle. I simply nodded, congratulated my sister, and walked inside to help prepare the dinner they would later eat. I learned to swallow my anger so deeply I forgot what it tasted like. Nathan was supposed to be my exit strategy. When I met him, he did not ask me to fix his life. He did not need me to untangle his finances or manage his emotions. He was a steady, grounded man who looked at me and saw a partner, not a servant. He represented a quiet, beautiful, boring life far away from the Clark family circus. I thought placing a ring on my finger would build a fortress around me. I thought marrying him meant I finally got to step off the family stage. I underestimated the show pony. A show pony always needs a new audience, and my parents were more than happy to sell the tickets. The boundary lines did not shatter overnight. They blurred slowly, inch by inch, starting at our family cabin on Lake Minnetonka a month ago. It was Labor Day weekend. The air smelled of charcoal smoke, citronella candles, and the damp, earthy scent of the lake. I was standing inside the screened porch, arranging hamburger buns on a plastic tray. Through the mesh screen, I had a clear view of the wooden deck down below. Nathan was standing by the red cooler, holding a canned soda. Alyssa cornered him. She wore a bright yellow bikini top and frayed denim cutoffs. She leaned back against the wooden railing, positioning herself so Nathan had no clear exit path without brushing past her. I watched her body language. I know my sister. I know the slight tilt of her head and the wide-eyed, innocent gaze she uses when she wants something on a shelf she cannot reach. Nathan said something mild, probably a comment about the humidity. Alyssa threw her head back and laughed. It was a loud, practiced, musical sound that carried over the noise of the neighbor's pontoon boat. It was a laugh, designed to be heard by everyone on the property. She stepped closer to him. She reached out with her manicured hand and brushed a piece of imaginary lint from his polo shirt. Her fingers did not flick the lint away. They lingered on his collarbone, tracing the fabric for 2 seconds too long. She looked up at him through her eyelashes, biting her lower lip. My stomach contracted. The plastic tray in my hands bent slightly under my grip. I shifted my gaze to the upper deck. My parents sat in matching cedar lounge chairs. Susan held a hard seltzer, the condensation dripping onto her pristine white capri pants. She was not looking at the lake. She was staring directly at Nathan and Alyssa. Susan smiled. She raised her plastic cup, pointing it toward the cooler. "Look at them," my mother announced to the patio, her voice carrying clear and sharp over the breeze. "They just share the same vibrant energy, do they not?" Nathan really brings out the fun in her. Gary chuckled, taking a sip of his beer. "He sure does. Good to see her smiling." Vibrant energy. It was not a compliment to my fiancé. It was an insult directed squarely at me. It was my mother broadcasting to the entire deck that I was dull, rigid, and tired, while my sister was bright, exciting, and full of life. It was a shiny wrapper placed over a toxic truth. I did what I had been trained to do for 3 decades. I played the peacekeeper. I pushed the burning bile down my throat. I pushed open the screen door, walked down the wooden steps, and handed Nathan a paper plate. I translated my parents' blatant disrespect into harmless quirks. I told myself Alyssa was just being overly friendly because she needed male attention. I told myself my mother was just happy Nathan fit in with the family. I smoothed the edges. I kept the peace. I was so incredibly blind, I thought my parents were just being insensitive. I did not realize they were conducting a live audition. I did not realize they were testing the waters, watching Nathan's reactions, calculating whether my steady, wealthy, successful fiancé could be peeled away from the workhorse and handed over to the show pony. Sitting in my freezing car outside the steakhouse, gripping the steering wheel while staring at the empty space where my wedding binder used to be, the memory of that lake house barbecue shifted from a painful annoyance into a terrifying revelation. My parents had not just made a rude comment, they had selected a target. And right before Nathan walked out of the restaurant tonight, ending our future without a single conversation, he had looked at his phone. He had looked at a picture of a little boy. A heavy, suffocating dread settled in my chest. I reached into my purse and pulled out my own cell phone. My thumb hovered over the screen. Before I could dial Nathan's number to demand an explanation, a new notification lit up my display. It was a text message, sent 3 days ago, buried under a pile of work emails. It was from my mother. It contained 6 words that made the blood freeze in my veins, opening a door to a nightmare I thought I had permanently locked 8 years ago. 72 hours before Nathan walked out of the steakhouse, a small digital breadcrumb dropped onto our kitchen island. It was Sunday morning. Sunlight streamed through the bay windows of our shared townhouse, catching the steam rising from the espresso machine. I was whisking eggs in a ceramic bowl, listening to the rhythmic hum of the refrigerator. Nathan was in the shower. His cell phone sat on the marble countertop, locked but face up. A notification chimed, the screen illuminated. I glanced over, expecting a weather alert or an automated calendar reminder. Instead, I saw my mother's name, Susan Clark. The message preview displayed a single, cryptic sentence. "We need to talk about Leo." I stopped whisking. The metal tines of my fork clattered against the ceramic bowl. My pulse fluttered against my throat. Leo. Who is Leo? My brain immediately launched into a frantic, misdirected panic, trying to solve a puzzle using the wrong pieces. For a wild second, I wondered if Nathan was hiding something. Was he involved in some illicit activity? No, the message originated from Susan. Why would my mother bypass me and text my fiancé about a stranger? Then, the familiar, exhausted dread of being the family fixer washed over me. Finances. My parents projected an image of suburban perfection, but they carried a terrifying amount of undisclosed credit card debt to maintain their country club membership and fund my sister's lavish lifestyle. I concluded that Leo must be a loan officer, a debt collector, or a shady financial consultant. Susan was hitting Nathan up for cash behind my back. She knew Nathan earned a lucrative salary developing tech software, and she was trying to manipulate him into bailing the Clark family out of another self-inflicted bankruptcy. I did not wait for Nathan to turn off the shower. I grabbed my car keys, drove straight to my parents' subdivision, and marched up their manicured front walkway. The air smelled of damp mulch and expensive fertilizer. Susan was in the front yard wearing gardening gloves and a wide-brimmed sun hat, meticulously trimming her prize-winning hydrangeas. She looked like the cover of a Midwestern lifestyle magazine. I skipped the pleasantries. I demanded to know why she was texting my future husband about money and who exactly Leo was. Susan froze. Her pruning shears snapped shut, severing a blue blossom that tumbled onto the soil. She turned to face me, and I watched her slip effortlessly into her favorite role, the wounded matriarch. She stripped off her gardening gloves, pressing a hand against her chest as if my accusation physically injured her heart. Her eyes pooled with instantaneous, practiced tears. She claimed I was losing my mind under the pressure of the upcoming nuptials. She spun a masterful narrative, insisting Leo was merely a boutique catering vendor she discovered in St. Paul. She swore she was only texting Nathan to ask if he would be willing to expand the appetizer budget because the financial strain of hosting was giving her severe insomnia. She flipped the script with lethal precision. Within 5 minutes, she had me apologizing. She made me feel like an ungrateful, paranoid bridezilla tearing her own family apart over a harmless text message. The deep-rooted peacekeeper programming inside my brain took over. I swallowed my suspicions, hugged her stiff shoulders, and drove home, ashamed of my own detective work. That illusion of safety lasted exactly 24 hours. Monday afternoon, I was standing behind the reception desk at the healthcare clinic, routing patient charts and putting out administrative fires. My cell phone vibrated in my scrub pocket. The caller ID displayed the name of our wedding floral designer, a high-demand artist in the warehouse district who required a deposit 6 months in advance. I answered the call, expecting a question about the table centerpieces. Instead, the designer sounded incredibly awkward, her voice tight with professional discomfort. She informed me that she had paused the sourcing of the imported orchids. She said she received a phone call from Susan early that morning. My mother had explicitly instructed the shop to freeze the contract, claiming the entire event was being drastically downsized due to unforeseen circumstances. The air evaporated from my lungs. The busy noise of the clinic waiting room faded into a dull, echoing ring. Why would my mother cancel the floral arrangements without consulting me? The walls of my carefully planned future began closing in. Susan was not stressed about the budget. She was actively dismantling the event. By Tuesday morning, mere hours before the catastrophic dinner at the steakhouse, the isolation became suffocating. Nathan had been dodging my phone calls all day, sending automated replies claiming he was stuck in back-to-back meetings. Desperate and vibrating with unspent adrenaline, I left the clinic on my lunch break and drove to his agricultural tech firm. The corporate lobby was a cavern of sleek glass, polished steel, and minimalist leather furniture. I marched up to the reception desk, expecting a warm greeting. The administrative assistant, a woman who usually asked about my wedding plans with genuine excitement, stood up abruptly. The color drained from her cheeks. She refused to meet my gaze, staring instead at the glowing screen of her computer monitor. I asked her to let Nathan know I was waiting in the lobby. She swallowed hard, her fingers trembling slightly as she adjusted her headset. "I'm sorry, Rebecca," she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. "Mr. Reed left strict instructions this morning. He notified building security. You cannot go up there. He requested no interruptions from you today. The humiliation hit me like a physical blow. The receptionist was looking at me not as the boss's future wife, but as a hostile threat. I stood in the center of that sterile corporate atrium, stripped of my dignity, staring at the security guards lingering near the elevator banks. I was entirely cut off from the man I loved. Now, sitting alone in the freezing confines of my sedan outside the steakhouse, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white, the disjointed pieces of the last 3 days crashed together. The missing leather binder from my back seat, the canceled orchids, the locked office doors, the cryptic text message. They were not random strokes of bad luck. They formed a deliberate, calculated siege. My family had built a trap, and Nathan had already stepped inside it and locked the door behind him. The digital chime of my cell phone shattered the quiet darkness of the parking garage. I flinched, dropping my gaze to the cup holder where my device rested. The screen glowed bright white, displaying a new email notification. It bypassed my primary inbox, landing in the unfiltered urgent folder. The sender address was a random string of numbers and letters, an anonymous, untraceable account. There was no subject line. There was no block of text attempting to explain the situation. There was only a single high-resolution attachment. My hands shook as I reached for the device. The cold glass of the screen bit into my fingertips. I tapped the file, holding my breath as the image rendered into focus. It was the exact same photograph I had just seen illuminated on Nathan's phone inside the restaurant. The 8-year-old boy, the sandy hair, the gap-toothed smile, the child my mother referred to as Leo. Staring into the digitized eyes of that little boy, the carefully constructed dam inside my memory broke, unleashing a flood of repressed history. The boy in the picture was not a stranger. He was not a loan officer. He was a ghost from 8 years ago. A living, breathing secret I had buried deep in the frozen soil of northern Minnesota to protect the sister who was currently stealing my life. The artificial light from my cellular device illuminated the dark interior of my sedan, casting harsh shadows across the steering wheel. I could not pull my eyes away from the photograph. The boy in the image possessed a specific shade of sandy blonde hair, a shade that matched my sister perfectly. Staring into his gap-toothed smile, the concrete walls of the downtown parking garage faded away. The ambient noise of distant city traffic vanished. The biting chill of the current Minnesota evening was suddenly replaced by a much deeper, older cold. My mind violently thrust me backward 8 years, dropping me into the middle of a frozen, terrifying night in late November of 2018. I was 23 years old, sitting in the driver's seat of my used Honda. The heater core struggled to keep up with the plunging temperatures, blasting dry, noisy air against the frosted windshield. The tires hummed a high, anxious pitch against the icy asphalt of Interstate 35, heading north toward Duluth. In the passenger seat sat a 20-year-old Alyssa. She was wrapped in a heavy wool blanket, her knees pulled tight against her chest. She was trembling, though not from the winter draft seeping through the door seals. She was sobbing with a raw, unfiltered panic that shook her entire frame. Less than 2 hours earlier, the pristine facade of the Clark household had fractured. Alyssa had walked into our parents' pristine, granite-countered kitchen and confessed that she was pregnant. She possessed no plan, no steady income, and no partner willing to claim responsibility. I watched our parents react. Susan and Gary did not rush forward to hold their youngest daughter. They did not offer comfort or guidance. Instead, I witnessed pure, unadulterated terror wash over their faces. It was not concern for Alyssa's health or her future. It was a suffocating dread over their own reputation. They pictured the whispers at the country club. They imagined the judgmental stares from their affluent neighbors. Their golden child, the flawless centerpiece of their suburban kingdom, had just introduced a catastrophic stain onto their record. Susan took immediate control. The solution was swift, clinical, and cruel. Alyssa was to be scrubbed from the local narrative. Susan decreed that her youngest daughter would pack a single suitcase and relocate to Duluth, taking up residence with a distant, estranged relative named Aunt Joan. Alyssa would remain hidden 3 hours away until the child was born, at which point Joan would assume quiet guardianship. Gary refused to finance the banishment through his primary accounts. He paced the kitchen floor, insisting that a sudden flow of cash to Duluth would raise red flags if anyone audited his business records. He demanded a buffer. He demanded a shadow. They both turned to me. I was the workhorse. I possessed a steady hospital job, a clean credit score, and a lifelong habit of cleaning up the messes my family left behind. They handed me the keys and told me to drive her away. I navigated the treacherous, sleet-covered highway while Alyssa wept into her hands beside me. I kept my eyes fixed on the red taillights of the semi-truck ahead of us, gripping the steering wheel as the snow began to fall faster. Alyssa reached across the center console. Her fingers, freezing and damp with tears, clutched the sleeve of my winter coat. She looked at me, her mascara smeared across her pale cheeks, her eyes wide with a desperate, clinging gratitude. "I owe you my life, Rebecca," she swore, her voice cracking over the hum of the heater. "I will never forget this. You are saving me. I will never betray you." I believed her. I translated her panic into a sacred bond between sisters. I deposited her at Aunt Joan's modest, drafty house near the freezing shores of Lake Superior, and I stepped into the role my parents demanded. Over the next year, I became the financial ghost sustaining their secret. When the hospital required a guarantor for the delivery costs, my name went on the billing forms. When Aunt Joan complained about the rising costs of diapers, formula, and pediatric visits, I initiated the monthly wire transfers from my personal checking account. I paid the price to keep my sister's reputation spotless. I subsidized the lie, so my parents could continue bragging about their flawless family at local dinner parties. The boy was born, named Leo, and absorbed into Aunt Joan's household. Alyssa returned to Minneapolis, slipping back into her curated, carefree life as if the entire ordeal had been nothing but a bad dream. The secret was buried, secured by the thousands of dollars I had quietly siphoned out of my own modest savings. Sitting in my car in the present day, the memory dissolved, leaving me gasping for air in the sterile silence of the parking garage. The jigsaw puzzle pieces slammed together with a force that made me physically nauseous. I reached back and touched the empty upholstery where my wedding binder used to be. The binder was not missing because of a careless mistake. Susan and Gary stole it. They knew my organizational habits. They knew I kept old financial records, archived bank statements, and tax documents tucked inside the back pockets of that leather folder for wedding loan applications. They needed those specific documents. They needed the paper trail. I visualized Nathan sitting in the steakhouse, his face twisted with disgust. He had not just received a random photograph. My parents had presented him with a meticulously curated portfolio. They handed him my old bank statements. They showed him the recurring wire transfers to a woman in Duluth. They pointed to the hospital billing records bearing my signature. They did not just hide Alyssa's involvement. They took the evidence of my sacrifice and inverted it. They told my fiancé that I was the mother. They wove a tragic, horrifying tale about how I had lived a reckless youth, birthed a secret child, and callously abandoned him in a distant city, paying blood money to keep him hidden. They weaponized my own lifelong loyalty. The financial generosity I poured out to save my sister was currently being used as the murder weapon to execute my future. The sheer, breathtaking cruelty of the maneuver paralyzed me. They were not merely trying to break off my engagement. They were ensuring Nathan despised me so deeply he would never look back, creating the perfect emotional vacuum for Alyssa to step into as the comforting, honest alternative. A surge of hot, frantic adrenaline flooded my system. I could not let this false narrative stand. I needed an alibi. I needed the one person who knew the undeniable truth of Leo's parentage. I picked up my phone, my fingers slipping against the screen. I scrolled through my deep archives of contacts, searching for the Duluth area code. I found the number for Aunt Joan. I pressed the call button, holding the device to my ear, listening to the hollow ringtone echo in the quiet car. I prayed she would answer. I planned to put her on speakerphone, drive straight to Nathan's apartment, and force him to listen to the woman who actually raised the boy. The line clicked. "Hello?" A raspy, guarded voice answered. "Aunt Joan," I breathed out, my voice trembling with urgency. "It is Rebecca. I need your help. Susan and Gary are telling Nathan a lie. They are trying to say Leo is mine. You have to tell him the truth. You were there. You know he belongs to Alyssa." A heavy, suffocating silence settled over the cellular connection. I could hear a television playing softly in the background of her house. I waited for the reassuring confirmation, the promise that she would set the record straight. "Rebecca," Joan said, her tone devoid of any warmth. Her voice was flat, practiced, and icy. "You need to tell him," I pleaded, gripping the steering wheel. "I can conference him in right now." "I am not doing that," Joan replied, the words landing like bricks on my chest. "Your mother called me yesterday. She explained the situation. Susan took care of us when things got difficult. She made sure Leo had what he needed. I am not getting involved in your jealousy." My breath caught in my throat. My jealousy. Susan had already reached her. Susan had not just stolen my binder, she had bought Joan's silence. The monthly payments I made years ago were forgotten, replaced by a fresh, lucrative bribe from my parents to ensure the vault remained sealed tight. "Do not call this number again, Rebecca," Joan stated. The line went dead. I lowered the phone, staring at the darkened screen. The conspiracy was airtight. My own sister had betrayed her sacred promise. My parents had fabricated an impeccable documented lie. The only witness had been bought and paid for. Every exit door was locked, bolted, and guarded by the people who shared my last name. As the reality of my total isolation settled over me, my phone vibrated in my palm. The screen illuminated with an incoming text message. It was not Nathan. It was a calendar invite, sent directly from the personal assistant of Carol Reed, Nathan's affluent, intimidating mother. The notification requested my presence for a private lunch at her country club tomorrow afternoon. I stared at the glowing invitation, a new wave of dread twisting my stomach. The poison had not just infected my fiancé. The lie had successfully crossed enemy lines, infiltrating the Reed family empire. I pulled through the wrought iron gates of the country club the following afternoon, handing the keys of my practical sedan to a valet who looked accustomed to parking imported luxury vehicles. The air carried the crisp, sterile scent of manicured golf greens and chlorinated water. The Reed family held generational wealth rooted in Minnesota agriculture, the kind of old money that funded university wings and operated entirely behind closed doors. Nathan grew up inside this fortress. I was merely a guest holding a temporary visitor badge. I walked into the private dining room. The space was eerily quiet, insulated by heavy velvet drapes and thick carpet. Carol Reed sat alone at a corner table near a bay window. She wore a tailored cashmere blazer and a string of pearls that likely cost more than my annual salary at the clinic. Carol served as the matriarch of the Reed Empire. She served on charity boards, hosted political fundraisers, and managed her family image with the precision of a military general. She did not stand when I approached. She offered a brief, tight smile that did not reach her eyes and gestured to the empty chair across from her. I sat down, placing my purse on the floor. A waiter materialized instantly, pouring sparkling water into crystal goblets before vanishing back into the shadows. "You look tired, Rebecca," Carol noted, her voice smooth and measured. I kept my posture rigid. I did not offer a polite excuse about wedding planning exhaustion. I looked straight at her, waiting for the interrogation to begin. I assumed she called me here to express her horror. I assumed Nathan had driven straight to her estate last night, showed her the fabricated bank statements, and laid out the tragic tale of my abandoned child. I braced myself for a lecture on morality. Carol picked up her silver spoon and slowly stirred her black tea. "Susan called me this morning," she began, the spoon clinking softly against the porcelain. "We had a very illuminating conversation about your early 20s. I must admit, The Reed family values transparency above all else. We require a spotless foundation for anyone entering our circle. I felt a surge of desperate defense rise in my throat. I leaned forward, keeping my voice low and steady. Carol, whatever my mother told you, it is a fabrication. The child belongs to my sister. I only paid the hospital bills because Alyssa was 20 years old and terrified. My parents are twisting the narrative to force a wedge between Nathan and me. If you just look at the hospital records, you will see the truth. Carol stopped stirring her tea. She set the spoon down upon the saucer with meticulous care. She looked at me, her expression shifting from polite concern to something cold, sharp, and highly calculated. The Midwestern facade vanished, revealing the ruthless corporate tactician underneath. "You seem to think I care about the truth, Rebecca," she said. The air in the room grew heavy. I stared at her, my mind stalling. Carol folded her hands elegantly on the table. "Let us speak plainly," she continued. "Whether the boy belongs to you or your sister is entirely irrelevant to me. What matters is the disruption. What matters is the undeniable fact that you bring a level of friction this family cannot tolerate." I sat frozen, listening as the matriarch of the Reed family dismantled my entire reality. "You are a very capable woman," Carol observed, her tone stripped of any warmth. "You run a busy medical facility. You manage complex problems. You possess a strong will, fierce independence, and a stubborn refusal to bend. Those are excellent traits for a clinic manager. They are terrible traits for a Reed daughter-in-law." The pieces of the puzzle clicked together, forming a horrifying picture. Carol was not a victim of my parents' deceit. She was an active co-conspirator. "You cannot be controlled," Carol stated, letting the words hang in the quiet dining room. "If you marry Nathan, you will insist on maintaining your own career. You will refuse to conform to our social obligations. You do not need our money, which means I hold no leverage over you. You make my son prioritize your quiet, modest life over the legacy he is supposed to inherit." I felt a cold sweat prickle along the back of my neck. "And Alyssa," I whispered, realizing the depth of the betrayal. Carol offered a thin, approving smile. "Alyssa is highly adaptable," she replied. "Your mother and I agree that Alyssa is much more suited to our lifestyle. She is eager to please. She understands the value of appearances. She would thrive hosting charity galas and wearing the clothes I select for her. She is a decorative, pliable addition to this family. You are a concrete wall." The unholy alliance made perfect, terrifying sense. Two matriarchs trading their daughters like commodities on a stock exchange floor. Susan desired the wealthy, prestigious son-in-law for her favorite golden child. Carol desired a docile, superficial daughter-in-law she could easily manipulate and mold. They recognized a mutual goal, struck a silent bargain, and utilized a fabricated scandal to clear the path. "Nathan believes the lie," I said, my voice trembling with suppressed rage. "You are letting your own son believe I am a monster just so you can swap his bride." "Nathan requires a push in the right direction," Carol countered smoothly. "He has always possessed a soft spot for charity cases. He thought he was rescuing you from your difficult family. Now, he believes you are the villain of the story. It is a necessary disillusionment. He will grieve, and then he will turn to the nearest source of comfort. Your mother assures me Alyssa is already providing excellent emotional support." Carol reached into her designer handbag. She retrieved a thick, cream-colored envelope and slid it across the polished mahogany table. It came to rest mere inches from my water goblet. I looked down. The top document was a non-disclosure agreement, drafted by a top-tier corporate law firm. Beneath the legal jargon rested a certified bank check. The amount was written in bold, unmistakable black ink. $50,000. "Consider this a gracious relocation fee," Carol offered. "Sign the document. Break off the engagement officially by tonight. Use the funds to move to another city, perhaps Chicago or Denver. Start fresh. If you walk away quietly without attempting to contact my son again, this generous offer remains valid. If you choose to fight, I will ensure my legal team ruins your professional reputation so thoroughly you will never work in healthcare again. I stared at the check. The zeros blurred together. I was sitting across from a woman who viewed human lives as chess pieces, maneuvering them across a board to protect her own power. She assumed I possessed a price tag. She assumed, like my mother, that I could be bought, bullied, and banished to the shadows. For the first time since Nathan walked out of the steakhouse, the panic inside my chest subsided, replaced by a strange, crystalline clarity. I was no longer just fighting the toxic operating system of the Clark family. I was fighting the empire I almost married into. I was surrounded by enemies on all sides, boxed in by wealth, manipulation, and profound greed. I did not scream. I did not throw the water goblet in her face. The workhorse knows how to conserve energy for the long haul. I reached out and placed my index finger on the edge of the cream-colored envelope. I pushed it slowly back across the table, leaving it directly in front of Carol. "I pay my own rent, Carol," I said, keeping my voice dead level, "and I handle my own family. Keep your money. You are going to need it to pay for the therapy your son requires when he realizes what his mother truly is." I stood up, grabbed my purse, and walked out of the private dining room without looking back. I navigated the plush carpets of the country club, my mind racing with a singular, burning focus. I needed evidence. I needed the undeniable proof that would shatter the lie, not to win Nathan back, but to expose the rot inside both houses. I retrieved my car from the valet and slid behind the wheel. My phone buzzed in the center console. It was a calendar notification reminding me of my own bridal shower, scheduled to begin in 2 hours at a downtown bistro. I intended to skip the event, assuming my mother had already canceled it alongside the floral arrangements. But a new text message arrived from a former college roommate. She sent a photograph from the bistro. The image displayed the room full of my friends and extended relatives, drinking champagne and laughing. Standing in the center of the room, wearing a stunning white lace dress and holding a glass of sparkling wine, was my sister. Alyssa was smiling radiantly, absorbing the applause of the room, while Nathan stood in the background, watching her with total admiration. They had not canceled my celebration. They had hijacked it. I navigated the afternoon traffic of downtown Minneapolis, my hands gripping the leather steering wheel of my sedan. The bitter conversation with Carol Reed replayed on a loop inside my mind. I had just walked away from a $50,000 bribe, rejecting a matriarch who viewed me as a threat to her pristine family empire. I needed a sanctuary. I needed the comfort of my closest friends. I pulled up to the upscale bistro I had booked 3 months prior. I paid the deposit for this private room with my own hard-earned clinic salary. It was supposed to be my bridal shower. It was designed to be an afternoon of celebration, surrounded by women who supported my upcoming marriage. Instead, I walked through the heavy glass double doors and stepped into a meticulously staged theater production. The private dining area buzzed with laughter, upbeat music, and the sharp clinking of champagne flutes. I stood in the entryway, shedding my coat, feeling a sudden chill that had nothing to do with the Minnesota weather. I looked around the room and realized I was a ghost haunting my own life. The floral arrangements I carefully selected weeks ago, modest white roses and silver eucalyptus, had vanished. In their place sat towering displays of bright pink peonies. Alyssa always loved peonies. I looked past the altered centerpieces and saw a custom banner stretched across the exposed brick wall near the windows. It did not offer congratulations to the bride. It featured elegant gold lettering that read, "Cheers to the new director." My sister stood in the center of the room, holding court. She wore a pristine ivory lace cocktail dress. She chose to wear pure white to my bridal event. She held a crystal flute, tossing her head back in a practiced, musical laugh as a group of my aunts and cousins gathered around her. Susan circulated the room with the efficiency of a seasoned politician. My mother touched arms, poured wine, and explained seamlessly to confused guests that my wedding plans were undergoing a sudden restructuring. She spun a polite fiction, claiming we decided to pivot the afternoon to celebrate Alyssa landing a lucrative brand partnership online. I stood paralyzed by the door. No one rushed over to greet me. No one handed me a drink or offered a hug. My mother had successfully rewritten the purpose of the afternoon before I even arrived, rendering me a secondary character at an event I financed. I scanned the perimeter of the room, desperate to find an anchor. My eyes locked onto a figure standing near the mahogany bar in the far corner. Nathan. He leaned against the polished wood, holding a glass of club soda with a tight grip. He did not look like a man attending a festive gathering. He looked like a sentry guarding a prison wall. His gaze found me across the crowded room, cutting through the sea of chatting relatives. There was no warmth in his eyes, no hesitation, and no confusion. He offered only a freezing, judgmental glare that pinned me to the floorboards. I started walking toward him, navigating through the groups of laughing women. As I grew closer, a specific visual detail caught my attention. It was a pebble of pure, calculated disrespect resting right against his throat. For our 1-year anniversary, I gifted Nathan a subtle navy silk tie. He loved the classic design. He promised me he would wear it to all our major wedding events as a symbol of our partnership. Today, a loud, geometric designer print wrapped around his collar. I recognized that specific pattern immediately. Last week, Alyssa flaunted a distinctive shopping bag from a high-end boutique, bragging loudly in my kitchen about a spontaneous gift she purchased for a special man in her life. She claimed it was for a secret date she was keeping under wraps. She bought that expensive fabric for my fiancé, and Nathan chose to wear it today. He actively discarded my meaningful gift, opting to wear my sister's claim on his chest for the entire room to witness. Before I could reach the bar and confront him, the sharp ring of a silver spoon tapping against crystal silenced the chatter. The music faded out. Alyssa stepped onto a small raised platform near the large bay windows, the afternoon sunlight catching the white lace of her dress. She smiled, radiating a sickeningly sweet aura of false humility. "I want to thank everyone for coming to support me today," Alyssa announced, her voice echoing perfectly across the quiet room. "This promotion means everything to my career, but more importantly, this challenging season of life has taught me the undeniable value of authenticity." She paused, letting her gaze sweep over the audience before landing directly on me. "Relationships, whether business or personal, must be built on truth," Alyssa continued, her tone dripping with passive-aggressive poison. "You cannot build a beautiful future on top of hidden secrets. Honesty always comes to the light. We all deserve partners who offer us a clean, transparent foundation. Let us toast to the truth." The room erupted into polite applause. Susan wiped a single proud tear from her cheek. The sheer audacity of the speech made my stomach churn with acid. Alyssa was lecturing a room full of my friends about honesty while standing on the stage my money rented. She wore the bridal color meant for my wedding, actively attempting to steal my future husband using a lie constructed to hide her own abandoned child. It was a masterclass in psychological warfare, executed in broad daylight. I watched Nathan turn away from the bar. He set his club soda down and walked into a quiet, dimly lit corridor leading toward the restrooms and the kitchen exit. I did not hesitate. I pushed past a group of coworkers and followed him into the shadows. The heavy wooden door closed behind me, cutting off the festive noise of the party. The hallway smelled of floor wax and roasted garlic. I called his name, my voice echoing off the narrow walls. He stopped walking. His shoulders stiffened, but he did not turn around immediately. "Nathan, please listen to me," I pleaded, keeping my voice low, desperate, and steady. "I know what my parents told you. I know what Susan showed you. It is a fabricated story. I am not the mother of that boy. Alyssa is. She got pregnant 8 years ago, and our parents sent her away to protect her image. I only paid the medical bills because she was young and terrified. They are using my financial help to frame me. Even your own mother is involved. Carol offered me a check today to disappear." They are swapping the narrative to tear us apart. He finally turned to face me. The geometric designer tie caught the dim hallway light, a mocking reminder of his shifting loyalties. He looked at me with the weary, irritated frustration of a scientist examining a deeply flawed hypothesis. Nathan operates in a world of code, agricultural yield maps, and hard statistics. He trusts spreadsheets over emotion. He demands proof. "I saw the bank transfers, Rebecca," he stated, his voice devoid of any lingering affection. The words hit me like a physical blow. "Your mother showed me the ledger," he continued, crossing his arms over his chest. "I saw your signature on the outgoing wire receipts to a woman in Duluth. Month after month, year after year, you funded a hidden life. I am a logical man. I rely on data. I do not deal in hysterics. And I certainly do not deal in wild conspiracy theories about my own mother joining forces with yours to ruin a wedding. The paper trail is undeniable. You lied by omission for our entire relationship." I opened my mouth to argue, frantic to make him understand that those transfers were the desperate actions of a sister saving her sibling, not a mother hiding a son. Before the words could leave my throat, the corridor door swung open. Alyssa stepped into the dim hallway. Her ivory dress swished softly against the carpet. She glided right past me, ignoring my existence as if I were a piece of furniture. She stopped next to Nathan, placing her manicured hand gently on his forearm. Her fingers rested exactly where the fabric of his suit met the geometric tie she purchased for him. "Is everything okay in here, Nathan?" Alyssa murmured, looking up at him with wide, sympathetic eyes. "You look stressed. We can leave through the back door if this environment is too toxic for you right now. I do not want you to feel trapped." Nathan looked down at her hand, his posture softening for a fraction of a second. Then he looked back up at me, his expression hardened into a concrete wall, impenetrable and cold. "I am reconsidering this entire marriage, Rebecca," he said, his voice echoing in the narrow space. "I need time to evaluate my future. Do not contact my office. Do not contact my phone until I reach a decision." He walked past me, escorted by the sister who ruined my life. I stood alone in the quiet hallway, listening to their footsteps fade into the bustling noise of the main dining room. I realized in that moment that words were entirely useless. Desperate verbal explanations held zero weight against a fabricated ledger of bank statements. If I wanted to survive this execution and clear my name, I could not fight a data-driven man with emotional pleas. I needed hard, irrefutable proof. I needed the original hospital records. I needed to leave this hijacked party, get in my car, and drive 3 hours north to Duluth. I walked out of that downtown bistro, leaving the noise of clinking champagne flutes and false laughter behind me. The heavy glass doors sealed shut, cutting off the sound of my sister securing her grip on my future. I stood on the concrete sidewalk, the crisp afternoon wind biting through my thin jacket, and I made a quiet, definitive choice. The peacekeeper inside me was dead. She died the second Nathan looked at me with disgust and walked away with Alyssa. I was done pleading. I was done trying to translate a lifetime of toxic behavior into something palatable. Arguing with narcissists without undeniable proof is a losing game. They will always twist the narrative, weaponize your emotions, and paint you as the unstable aggressor. If Nathan required data to break his blind gullibility, I would supply the raw data. I shifted out of the role of a desperate, abandoned bride and engaged the mindset of a clinical healthcare manager. I deal in hard facts, patient charts, and irrefutable documentation every single day. I know how the medical system operates. I know that lies cannot survive under the harsh fluorescent lights of a hospital records department. I climbed into my sedan, locked the doors, and merged onto Interstate 35, pointing my vehicle north. The drive from Minneapolis to Duluth spans roughly 3 hours. As the suburban sprawl faded in my rearview mirror, the landscape morphed into thick northern pine forests and wide, sweeping plains. The sky above turned a bruised, heavy gray, mirroring the suffocating pressure building in my chest. I kept both hands gripped tightly on the steering wheel, pressing the accelerator down. I audited the situation with cold precision. My parents had stolen the leather binder from my back seat. They utilized the old checking account numbers and routing details hidden in those pages to fabricate a story. They presented Nathan with a curated ledger showing recurring wire transfers to a woman in Duluth, wrapping the transaction in a tragic tale of my alleged secret motherhood. But bank statements only prove that money changed hands. They do not prove biological parentage. The only entity capable of verifying the true identity of Leo's mother was the medical facility where he drew his first breath. 8 years ago, I drove a sobbing, terrified Alyssa to a specific regional hospital overlooking the freezing waters of Lake Superior. I stood in the sterile admissions office and handed over my credit card to cover the deductible. Because she possessed no insurance of her own and because our parents refused to leave a paper trail tied to their accounts, my name went on the guarantor line. Alyssa signed the maternal intake forms. The ink on those documents told the undeniable truth. I pulled into the city limits of Duluth as the late afternoon sun began to dip below the horizon. The vast, dark expanse of the lake stretched out to my right, the water churning and restless under the autumn wind. I navigated the steep, winding streets until the imposing brick structure of the medical center loomed ahead. I parked my sedan in the visitor garage, my pulse drumming a steady, anxious rhythm against my throat. I grabbed my purse, ensuring my driver's license was easily accessible, and marched through the sliding automatic doors. The lobby smelled familiar, a blend of industrial floor wax and sharp antiseptic. It was an aroma that usually brought me comfort, signaling a realm where I held authority and understood the rules. I bypassed the main reception desk and followed the blue signage leading down a long, quiet corridor toward the central records and billing department. I stepped up to the frosted glass partition. A woman with silver hair and a woven lanyard around her neck sat behind a dual monitor setup. I offered a polite, professional greeting. I spoke her language. I introduced myself, produced my government identification, and explained that I served as the primary financial guarantor for a maternity patient admitted in November of 2018. I requested a full, unredacted copy of the birth records, the maternal intake forms, and the original billing consent paperwork. The clerk nodded, her demeanor calm and efficient. She took my identification, turned to her keyboard, and began typing. The rhythmic clacking of the plastic keys echoed in the empty hallway. I stood there, exhaling a long, shaky breath. Relief began to pool in my stomach. I pictured myself driving back to Minneapolis, walking straight into Nathan's office, and dropping the freshly printed hospital-stamped documents onto his desk. I imagined the look on his face when he read Alyssa's name on the biological mother line. I visualized the empire of lies crumbling into dust. The typing stopped. I looked up. The clerk was frowning, her eyes scanning the data on her left monitor. She adjusted her glasses, clicked her mouse a few times, and sighed softly. She turned back to face me, sliding my driver's license under the glass partition. "I am sorry, Miss Clark," she said, her voice laced with genuine administrative regret. "I cannot fulfill this request." I gripped the edge of the counter, my professional composure faltering. I asked her if there was a discrepancy with my identification, or if I needed to fill out a specific release authorization. I reminded her that my signature was on the financial guarantee, which legally granted me access to the billing archives. "Your credentials are fine," she explained gently. "The issue is the date of service. You mentioned the admission occurred in late 2018. I confirm the timeline." The clerk folded her hands over her keyboard. "Per our state retention laws, this facility is only required to house routine maternity intake and financial billing records for a period of 7 years," she stated. "Unless there is ongoing litigation or a specific pediatric hold placed by a physician, standard administrative files are scheduled for destruction to maintain server space and privacy compliance." The air vanished from the corridor. My lungs refused to expand. I stared at her, the horrific math assembling itself in my brain. Leo celebrated his 8th birthday 3 months ago. I leaned closer to the glass, my voice rising in a frantic pitch. I begged her to check the physical archives. the off-site storage facilities, or the backup servers. I explained that my entire life depended on retrieving a single piece of paper from that specific night. She offered a sympathetic, helpless expression. The digital files underwent our routine automated purge at the end of the fiscal quarter, she said softly. The physical carbon boxes from that year were sent to the incinerator weeks ago. The hospital has nothing left from that admission. The records no longer exist. I stepped away from the counter, the linoleum floor suddenly feeling unsteady beneath my boots. I thanked her, functioning on pure shock, and stumbled back down the long corridor. I pushed through the sliding glass doors and walked out into the freezing Duluth evening. The wind whipping off Lake Superior hit my face, biting into my skin, but I barely registered the cold. I stood in the concrete parking garage, leaning my weight against the side of my sedan, fighting the overwhelming urge to vomit. My parents had not just crafted a clever lie, they had timed it with terrifying precision. They waited until the 7-year retention window closed. They knew the medical facility purged their archives. They knew that if I tried to retrace my steps and gather official evidence, I would hit a brick wall of deleted servers and incinerated boxes. The sheer, staggering scope of the betrayal threatened to crack my sanity. I was legally and permanently erased from my own defense. A sharp, metallic taste of adrenaline flooded my mouth. I squeezed my eyes shut, forcing my brain to rewind. I went back to that frozen night in 2018. I pictured the cramped admissions office. I pictured the tired nurse sliding a clipboard across a laminate desk. I pictured the heavy pen in my hand. They used triplicate forms: white for the hospital, pink for the attending physician, yellow for the guarantor. My eyes snapped open in the dark parking garage. When I paid the bill, the nurse tore off the bottom yellow sheet and handed it to me for my personal records. I took that singular piece of paper, folded it in half, and put it in my coat pocket. It was the only surviving physical proof left on Earth that named Alyssa as the mother and Susan as the orchestrator of the cover-up. Panic seized my chest, squeezing my ribs like a vice. Where was that yellow sheet? I recently transferred dozens of old banking statements and tax returns into the leather wedding binder to prepare for our joint mortgage application. If I had moved that specific medical document into the binder, and my parents found it when they raided my back seat, the paper was already reduced to ashes in my father's suburban fireplace. If they possessed the yellow sheet, the truth was dead. Alyssa would play the victim forever. Carol Reed would secure her pliable daughter-in-law. I would carry the permanent brand of a monster. But I kept a secondary location, a heavy, fireproof lockbox shoved into the darkest corner of my bedroom closet, holding birth certificates, passports, and documents too sensitive for a binder. The stakes skyrocketed, eclipsing everything else in my world. The wedding did not matter. Nathan's approval did not matter. The only thing that mattered was reaching my apartment before my family realized I was hunting for the remaining evidence. I yanked the car door open, threw my vehicle into gear, and sped out of the concrete structure. I merged onto the dark, desolate stretch of the interstate, pointing the headlights south toward Minneapolis. I pushed the speedometer far past the legal limit, the engine roaring against the silent, frozen plains. My entire future hung on a single faded piece of carbon paper, hiding somewhere in the shadows of my apartment, waiting to be found before the people who shared my blood could destroy it forever. The tires of my sedan scraped against the concrete curb outside my apartment complex. I killed the engine, sitting in the dark driver's seat for a fraction of a second to let my racing pulse stabilize. The long journey back from Duluth felt like a blurred, frantic dream. I navigated the desolate stretches of the interstate on pure adrenaline, my eyes burning from the oncoming headlights. I grabbed my keys from the ignition and sprinted across the illuminated parking lot, ignoring the burning sensation in my lungs. I took the stairs 2 at a time, flying up to the 3rd floor. I jammed my key into the deadbolt, twisted the lock, and pushed the heavy wooden door open. My townhouse was silent. The pale glow of the streetlights filtered through the horizontal blinds, casting long, geometric shadows across the hardwood floor. I did not bother reaching for the overhead light switches. I moved through the quiet living room with urgent, calculated precision. I headed straight for my home office, a small spare bedroom I converted into a sanctuary of organization. Tall metal filing cabinets lined the left wall. My mahogany desk sat in the center of the room, immaculate and orderly. Growing up in the Clark household meant enduring a total lack of privacy. Susan possessed a lifelong habit of snooping through drawers, reading diaries, and auditing her daughter's belongings to maintain leverage. To survive under her roof, I learned to hide my genuine liabilities in plain sight. I created decoys. I pulled open the top drawer of my primary filing cabinet. The superficial folders rested exactly where I left them. I always kept basic banking ledgers, old utility bills, and expired insurance policies near the front of the rack. My parents were incredibly clever manipulators, but they also suffered from profound arrogance. When they utilized my spare key last week to steal the wedding binder, they likely searched this room first. They grabbed the most obvious prize, assuming I lacked the strategic foresight to bury the truly dangerous evidence. I abandoned the decoy cabinets and walked down the short hallway into my master bedroom. I dropped to my knees on the carpet and crawled into the deep, windowless expanse of my walk-in closet. I pushed aside heavy-hanging winter coats, stacked shoeboxes, and spare blankets. I reached into the darkest corner until my fingers brushed against cold, unyielding steel. It was a commercial-grade fireproof lockbox. It weighed nearly 40 pounds, designed to survive a structural collapse and resist tampering. I gripped the thick carrying handle and dragged the metal container out into the ambient light of the bedroom. My hands shook as I reached for the combination dial. I forced my breathing to slow, focusing my vision on the small engraved numbers. 32, 14, 41. The internal mechanism clicked with a heavy, satisfying thud. I unlatched the steel clasp and lifted the lid, the hinges groaning softly in the quiet room. The interior smelled of enclosed space, dust, and aged paper. I bypassed my current passport, my birth certificate, and the title to my vehicle. I dug past a thick stack of old collegiate transcripts and dental records. At the very bottom of the steel chamber, resting flat beneath a sealed envelope of government savings bonds, lay a folded piece of yellow carbon paper. My breath hitched in my throat. I lifted the thin, fragile sheet with tremendous care, terrified the brittle edges might tear in my trembling hands. I unfolded the document on the carpet, smoothing the creases with the palm of my hand. The ink was faded from nearly a decade of storage, but the typed lettering remained razor-sharp. Regional Medical Center of Duluth, November 2018. Patient intake and financial consent. I traced my index finger down the printed lines, reading the irrefutable truth I had guarded for so many years. Biological mother, Alyssa Clark. Guarantor and financial proxy, Rebecca Clark. Emergency contact and coordinating guardian, Susan Clark. The names alone were damning enough to shatter the illusion. But Nathan was a man of data, logic, and profound skepticism. He trusted spreadsheets over emotion. He would look at a flimsy carbon copy and suspect a clever forgery. He would assume I typed the document myself in a desperate bid to clear my ruined name. I needed something stronger than typed letters to break his blind gullibility. My eyes shifted to the bottom right corner of the yellow page, landing on a raised, embossed seal stamped directly over the final signatures. 8 years ago, Aunt Joan required immediate medical pry to make pediatric decisions for the infant. The hospital demanded a notarized transfer of temporary guardianship before Alyssa could be discharged. I worked as an entry-level clinic administrator during that time. I possessed a federal notary license for certifying patient directives. In the chaotic, terrifying blur of that freezing night in 2018, I accidentally brought my heavy brass clinic notary stamp home in my winter coat pocket. I utilized that exact brass instrument to certify the hospital paperwork on Aunt Joan's kitchen table. The raised, textured seal bore my official state registration number, the exact date of execution, and the undeniable emblem of the Minnesota Healthcare Board. That heavy brass stamp elevated a simple piece of hospital stationery into a legally binding federal document. It transformed the faded yellow paper into a lethal weapon. It could not be faked. It could not be contested by a high-priced corporate lawyer, a suspicious tech developer, or a toxic matriarch. The embossed seal proved beyond any shadow of a doubt that Alyssa gave birth to Leo, and that Susan orchestrated the cover-up, utilizing my legal authority to finalize the transaction. I did not shed a single tear. The lingering sorrow over losing my fiancé evaporated, replaced by a cold, calculating determination. The peacekeeper identity I wore for 3 decades fractured and fell away, leaving a fierce, unyielding clinic manager in its place. I stood up from the bedroom floor, holding the document like a shield. I walked back into the home office and retrieved a pristine, unbending manila folder from my desk drawer. I slid the yellow carbon copy inside, sealing the paper flap. It was no longer just a medical receipt. It was my armor. It was the key to my exoneration and the exact instrument required for their downfall. I grabbed my oversized leather tote bag from the chair and carefully zipped the manila folder into the waterproof interior pocket. I needed to formulate a tactical plan. I needed to figure out how to corner Nathan in a neutral environment and force him to run his fingers over the embossed seal before he signed Carol Reed's non-disclosure agreement. Before I could chart my next move, the digital screen of my cell phone illuminated on the mattress. The device vibrated, the sudden noise slicing through the quiet tension of the apartment. I walked over and picked the phone up. The sender ID displayed my mother's name. The incoming text message did not contain her usual passive-aggressive pleasantries. It did not offer a polite excuse or a fake apology. It was a direct, chilling command, issued by a woman who believed she held all the winning cards. "Rebecca, we are gathered at the house. You need to come over immediately. We are holding a family intervention. It is time to discuss the secrets you have been hiding from Nathan." I stared at the glowing text, a dark, cynical smile pulling at the corners of my mouth. They intended to corner me. They planned to surround me in their suburban fortress, utilizing Nathan as an audience while they forced a public confession. They thought they were luring a defenseless, panicked animal into an inescapable trap. They had no idea I was walking into their ambush carrying the matches that would burn their entire empire to the ground. I stood in the center of my bedroom, staring at the open closet. My gaze drifted over the familiar rows of beige cardigans, soft gray knit sweaters, and muted blouses. For my entire adult existence, I dressed to blend into the wallpaper. The peacekeeper never wears bold colors because bold colors draw attention, and attention always threatens the golden sibling. Today, the peacekeeper was dead. I bypassed the neutral garments and reached for the darkest, sharpest clothing I owned. I selected a tailored charcoal blazer that cut a severe silhouette, pairing it with crisp black trousers and polished leather boots. I applied a layer of deep crimson lipstick, a shade my mother historically criticized as far too combative for polite society. I wanted to look combative. I wanted to project the cold, unyielding authority of a woman who manages medical crises for a living. I zipped my oversized leather tote, feeling the rigid edge of the manila folder resting securely inside the waterproof lining. I grabbed my keys, descended the stairwell, and climbed into my vehicle. The drive toward the affluent suburbs consumed 25 minutes. I utilized every single mile to conduct a ruthless internal audit of my 31 years on Earth. The highway streetlights flickered overhead, casting rapid, rhythmic shadows across the dashboard. I realized that my profound loyalty had been entirely misplaced. Every single instance where I shielded my sister from the consequences of her own disastrous choices, I was not demonstrating familial love. I was financing my own eventual destruction. When I paid her parking citations, when I fabricated excuses for her failing collegiate grades, when I steered my car through a blizzard to Duluth and signed my legal name onto her medical debt, I was handing my parents the exact bricks they required to construct my prison. They conditioned me to function as the silent, reliable vault for their toxic secrets. They operated under the arrogant assumption that I would never possess the spine to spin the combination dial and expose the rot hidden inside. I steered the sedan into the sweeping, immaculate driveway of the Clark residence. The sprawling two-story colonial structure resembled a cinematic postcard of Midwestern success. The manicured lawn stretched flawlessly toward the street, unaffected by the changing autumn season. Warm, golden illumination spilled from the oversized bay windows, projecting a carefully curated image of welcoming safety. I knew the warmth was a highly calibrated illusion, a glossy veneer masking a culture of manipulation. I killed the engine. I grasped the handles of my tote bag, feeling the stiff structure of the folder pressing firmly against my palm. A surge of electric, dangerous anticipation coursed through my veins. I was marching directly into a firing squad, but I was the only person in the vicinity carrying live ammunition. I pushed the heavy oak front door open and crossed the threshold into the grand foyer. The atmosphere smelled of expensive vanilla candles and citrus floor wax, a scent designed to mask the stench of their deception. I navigated the short hallway, listening to the rhythmic ticking of the antique grandfather clock, and descended 2 steps into the sunken living space. The players were already positioned on their designated marks. It was a meticulously choreographed ambush, staged for maximum psychological impact. Alyssa perched on the edge of the plush velvet sofa. She wore a modest pastel cashmere sweater, her hair pulled back into a simple clip, radiating an aura of innocent, supportive fragility. Nathan sat in the oversized leather armchair opposite her. His posture remained brutally rigid. His face resembled an unreadable mask of cold granite. He did not lift his chin when I entered the space. He kept his gaze fixed intently on the grain of the mahogany coffee table, refusing to acknowledge my presence. My father, Gary, stood near the stone fireplace, swirling a finger of amber liquor inside a crystal tumbler. The mantel behind him displayed a dozen framed photographs, nearly all of them featuring Alyssa smiling brightly at various milestones. My mother, Susan, occupied the dead center of the room, standing with her hands clasped delicately in front of her waist. As soon as I cleared the entryway, Gary initiated the first tactical maneuver. He moved silently past me, grasped the brass handle of the front door, and pushed the heavy wood shut. The deadbolt clicked into place with a sharp, echoing snap. It was a classic, heavy-handed psychological intimidation tactic. He wanted to ensure I felt physically restricted. He locked the exit to signal that I was trapped inside their suburban courtroom until they finished executing their sentence. I stood my ground in the center of the Persian rug, clutching my bag. I surveyed the room, absorbing their overwhelming smug confidence. My parents genuinely believed they held an unbeatable hand. They thought they had cornered a panicked, defenseless animal. Their objective was obvious. They intended to publicly annihilate my engagement, forcing me to confess to a fabricated sin while Nathan watched. By breaking me down in front of him, they would clear the runway for Alyssa to swoop in, offering her shoulder for him to cry on. The dramatic irony saturated the air so thickly it felt tangible. My pulse settled into a slow, calm rhythm. It was deliciously satisfying to watch their arrogant postures, knowing exactly what was zipped inside my bag. They had absolutely no idea the federal notary stamp existed. They had no idea their meticulously constructed empire of lies was about to collapse under the weight of a single faded yellow carbon copy. They assumed they were the hunters, completely oblivious to the fact that they just locked themselves in a cage with the predator. Susan stepped forward, initiating the theatrical performance. She lowered her shoulders, adopting a mask of profound, tragic maternal concern. Her eyes glistened with perfectly summoned artificial tears. She reached out, her fingers trembling slightly, performing specifically for the man sitting in the leather armchair. She needed Nathan to witness a heartbroken mother valiantly attempting to save her corrupted daughter. "Rebecca," Susan began, her tone dripping with manufactured sorrow, "please take a seat. We did not want to do this, but you left us no other option. This is an intervention. We love you deeply, but we can no longer stand by and watch you drag a good, honest man into your web of hidden sins. I remained standing. I refused to move toward the empty chair they designated for the accused. I kept my posture perfectly straight, my shoulders squared in the dark blazer, holding my leather tote firmly against my hip. I shifted my gaze toward Nathan. I waited for him to speak. I waited for him to demand a fair trial, to question the ridiculous spectacle unfolding in front of him, to show a fraction of the loyalty I gave him over the past 2 years. He remained entirely silent. He stared at the hardwood floorboards, acting as a willing, eager participant in my execution. His silence confirmed everything I needed to know. He was not a victim of their manipulation. He welcomed the lie because the lie gave him a convenient, guilt-free excuse to abandon our relationship and pursue the shiny, superficial prize sitting on the velvet sofa. Susan sighed heavily. It was a dramatic, breathy sound, engineered to convey decades of carrying an unbearable burden. She glanced at Alyssa, who dutifully lowered her head, playing the role of the traumatized sibling. Susan turned her gaze back to me, her eyes narrowing with malicious intent beneath her mask of concern. She prepared to deliver the killing blow, supremely confident that I possessed no shield to deflect it. "It is time to stop running, Rebecca," Susan whispered, ensuring the quiet room caught every single syllable. "It is time to admit what you did with that poor boy." Susan's voice broke, delivering a perfectly calibrated crack of sorrow that echoed in the quiet living room. She commenced the intervention with a masterclass in theatrical grief, adopting the posture of a mother carrying an unbearable burden. She paced slowly across the Persian rug, weaving a detailed, agonizing fiction about my past. According to her new narrative, I did not spend my early 20s working grueling double shifts at the healthcare clinic. She erased the years I spent wearing faded scrubs, eating cold dinners out of plastic containers, and agonizing over textbook expenses. Instead, she painted a vivid picture of a reckless, irresponsible youth. She described fictional nights of erratic behavior, claiming I ran with a dangerous crowd to rebel against their structured, loving household. She spun a tale where those imaginary choices culminated in an unwanted pregnancy, resulting in a child I coldly cast aside to preserve my own selfish ambitions. Gary stepped away from the stone fireplace, adding his baritone voice to the choir of deception. The scent of his amber liquor mingled with the burning cedar logs on the hearth. "We tried to guide you, Rebecca," he stated, shaking his head with profound disappointment. "We offered you every resource to raise Leo properly, but you refused to accept accountability. You dumped that innocent boy on Joan and drove away without shedding a single tear. It has torn this family apart trying to cover for your callousness." The audacity of the lie forced a sharp intake of breath into my lungs. They were taking the exact sacrifices I made to save their reputation and inverting them, forging my loyalty into a weapon designed to execute my future. "And poor Alyssa," Susan sighed, gesturing toward the velvet sofa where my sister sat. "She had to step up when you walked away. She could not bear to see her own nephew suffer in Duluth. She used her modest internship stipends to send money up north, begging Joan to buy him warm winter coats and school supplies while you hoarded your clinic salary." Alyssa executed her cue flawlessly. She let a single tear trace a path down her cheek. She did not brush it away. She allowed the moisture to catch the warm glow of the table lamps, projecting an aura of fragile, wounded empathy. She leaned forward, bridging the physical gap between the sofa and the oversized leather armchair. Her manicured hand extended, coming to rest gently on Nathan's forearm. Her fingers curled softly into the wool sleeve of his tailored suit jacket. "It broke my heart," Alyssa whispered, her voice trembling with manufactured distress. "I just wanted little Leo to know someone in this family cared about his existence." I kept my gaze locked firmly on Nathan. This constituted the defining test of our entire relationship. 2 years of shared holidays, quiet morning coffees, and meticulous future planning sat on the table between us. I waited for the man I loved to halt the theatrics. I expected the pragmatic agricultural tech developer to demand empirical evidence. I anticipated he would ask for my perspective, question the glaring logical inconsistencies of their story, or inquire why the bank statements lacked any corresponding biological documentation. A partner who genuinely respected my integrity would never accept a guilty verdict without cross-examining the witnesses. Nathan did not ask a single question. He looked down at Alyssa's hand resting upon his arm. He did not pull away from her touch. Instead, he shifted his posture, leaning slightly into her grasp, offering silent comfort to the woman who was actively destroying my life. He raised his head and locked eyes with me. The expression settling over his features contained no confusion, no lingering affection, and no benefit of the doubt. It held only raw, unfiltered contempt. His jaw tightened, and his lips curled into a sneer of supreme moral superiority. He looked at me as if I were a hazardous pathogen he accidentally brought into his sterile environment. "I cannot believe I almost married someone capable of this," he spat, the words slicing through the warm, cedar-scented air. That sentence acted as a heavy iron key, unlocking a dark door inside my mind. The true emotional climax of the evening did not belong to my parents' fabricated tragedy. It belonged to the man sitting in the armchair. A profound, staggering epiphany washed over me. Nathan was not a naive victim trapped in a sophisticated web of deceit. He was a willing, eager participant. He built his entire career on verifying complex data sets, challenging anomalies, and demanding structural proof before drawing conclusions. Yet, presented with a wildly inconsistent narrative from a family known for superficial drama, he swallowed the story without a second thought. He accepted the lie because the lie offered him a priceless commodity. It handed him a guilt-free exit visa. He desired my sister. He wanted the bright, uncomplicated, decorative show pony who flirted with him at the lake house and bought him expensive silk ties. However, breaking an engagement to pursue the bride's younger sibling required a villain. It required a scandal massive enough to justify his sudden change of heart. My parents handed him that exact villain origin story on a silver platter, and he snatched it up with desperate enthusiasm. Believing their fiction absolved him of any wrongdoing. He could dump the rigid, exhausted workhorse and pursue the vibrant younger sister while wearing the cape of a righteous hero. He did not care if the story was true. He only cared that it was convenient. The final lingering fragment of the peacekeeper inside my soul withered and blew away like dry ash. I felt no urge to weep. I experienced no desire to scream, throw the crystal tumblers, or passionately defend my honor against their verbal assaults. The frantic anxiety that plagued my drive from Duluth evaporated entirely. In its place, I felt a terrifying, glacial tranquility. I was a clinician observing a terminal diagnosis. I remained utterly mute. My silence emboldened them, interpreting my quiet demeanor as a paralyzed confession of guilt. Gary puffed out his chest, stepping away from the hearth to loom over the center of the room. "You have shamed this household for the last time," my father declared, pointing a stern finger in my direction. Susan nodded solemnly, dabbing her dry eyes with a silk tissue. "We just want you to get the psychological help you so desperately need, Rebecca," she added, her tone dripping with toxic pity. "But Nathan deserves to build a life with someone who understands fundamental family values. Someone who does not harbor dark, destructive secrets." I let them talk. I listened as they stacked falsehood upon falsehood, building the balloon of their deception larger and larger. They filled the room with hot air, puffing up their own righteous indignation until the sheer tension in the space threatened to shatter the bay windows. They planned my exile. They discussed how they would handle the canceled wedding invitations to save face in the neighborhood. They mapped out a new future where Alyssa and Nathan could find solace in each other's company after surviving my alleged sociopathy. I let the lie inflate to its maximum unpoppable size. I watched Nathan stroke the back of Alyssa's hand, cementing their new alliance in front of my face. I lowered my gaze, breaking eye contact with the traitor sitting in the leather chair. My right arm dropped slowly to my side. My fingertips brushed the cool brass zipper of my oversized leather tote bag, tracing the metal teeth. I slipped my hand inside the waterproof lining, my knuckles grazing the crisp edge of the unbending manila folder waiting in the dark. My fingers curled around the brass zipper of my leather tote. The metallic rasp sliced through the heavy, cedar-scented air of the living room. It was a sharp, grating noise that drew 4 pairs of eyes toward my hands. I withdrew the unbending manila envelope, grasping the edges with steady palms. I felt a strange, buoyant lightness spreading through my chest. For 31 years, I carried the crushing weight of their secrets. I functioned as the load-bearing pillar of this household. Tonight, I was swinging a sledgehammer at the foundation. The room remained thick with a suffocating, arrogant satisfaction. My father stood near the hearth, swirling his amber liquor, portraying the disappointed patriarch. Gary operates a boutique insurance brokerage in the suburbs, a career built on calculating risk, denying claims, and demanding verified proof. My mother dabbed her dry cheeks with a silk tissue, playing the heartbroken martyr. My sister kept her manicured fingers resting gently on my fiancé's tailored sleeve, acting as the compassionate savior. They waited for my tearful confession. They anticipated my surrender. I leaned forward. The fabric of my charcoal blazer pulled taut across my shoulders. I dropped the folder onto the center of the glass coffee table. The resulting smack echoed in the enclosed space, disrupting their theatrical performance. I did not raise my voice. I did not shed a single tear. I maintained a terrifying, clinical calmness, channeling the authority I used to manage catastrophic emergencies at the healthcare facility. I flipped the manila cover open. I extracted the faded yellow carbon copy. I did not hand the medical record to Nathan. He lost the privilege of my direct attention the moment he chose to believe a fabrication over my character. Instead, I slid the brittle sheet across the smooth glass surface directly toward my father. "Gary, I suggest you put on your reading glasses," I instructed, keeping my tone dead and level. "You spend your entire week evaluating liability claims and verifying indemnification signatures at your firm. Tell me what you see." My father frowned, his brow furrowing in genuine confusion. He set his crystal tumbler onto the mantel. He stepped away from the fireplace, crossing the Persian rug. He leaned over the coffee table, peering down at the aged document. I did not wait for him to process the text. I read the lines aloud, ensuring every syllable carried into the corners of the room. "Regional Medical Center of Duluth," I announced, my voice cutting through the silence like a scalpel. "November 2018. Patient intake and financial consent. Biological mother, Alyssa Clark." A sharp, ragged gasp erupted from the velvet sofa. I kept reading. "Financial guarantor, Rebecca Clark. Emergency contact and coordinating guardian, Susan Clark." The illusion shattered, fragmenting into 1,000 irrecoverable pieces. The shift in the room occurred instantaneously. Alyssa snatched her hand away from Nathan's arm as if his wool suit had suddenly caught fire. The manufactured tears dried up immediately on her cheeks. The color drained from her face, leaving her complexion a sickly, chalky white. The golden child, stripped of her protective armor, possessed no survival skills. She never had to defend herself because I always absorbed the incoming fire. Now, facing the cold, hard reality of her own choices, she simply collapsed. The show pony mask dissolved, exposing a terrified, cornered child staring at the undeniable proof of her hidden past. Gary froze. His eyes darted rapidly across the typed letters, his insurance broker instincts colliding with the catastrophic reality of his ruined family narrative. He opened his mouth, but no sound emerged. Susan panicked. The matriarch lost her footing. She lunged forward, her hands hovering frantically over the glass table. "That is a forgery!" Susan stammered, her voice skyrocketing into a shrill, desperate pitch. "She printed that herself." "She is trying to trick you, Nathan. It is a fake paper she typed up to save her own skin." I shifted my gaze to the man sitting in the oversized leather armchair. "Look at the bottom right corner," I commanded, addressing Nathan for the first time since I entered the house. Nathan leaned forward, his posture rigid. He works in agricultural tech development. His entire profession requires cross-referencing state land registries, interpreting soil data, and verifying government subsidies. He reviews certified, legally binding contracts on a daily basis. He knows exactly what a federal seal looks like. Resting squarely over the final signatures was the raised, textured impression of my brass clinic notary stamp. "That is a state-registered notary seal," I stated calmly. "It bears my official Minnesota Healthcare Board identification number. It is pressed directly into the carbon paper. It cannot be printed from a home computer. It cannot be replicated. It constitutes irrefutable federal-level proof of biological parentage and financial proxy." Nathan stared at the embossed seal. The confident, sneering contempt he wore moments ago vanished. His jaw dropped slightly. His breathing turned shallow and rapid. The pristine, logical world he inhabited just collided with a nightmare of human depravity. He prided himself on being the smartest man in any boardroom, a developer who could spot a flawed algorithm from a mile away. Yet, he missed the most glaring glitch in his own personal life. The math finally aligned, painting a horrifying portrait of the trap he willingly stepped into. Before anyone could formulate a rebuttal, I reached back into the manila folder. I withdrew a second piece of paper. This document was not a faded medical receipt. It was a sheet of heavy stock, cream-colored stationery featuring an elegant monogram pressed into the header. "From the desk of Susan Clark." I held the letter up, allowing the warm light from the table lamps to illuminate the looping, cursive handwriting. "This is a letter you mailed to my apartment 3 weeks after the delivery," I said, turning my eyes toward my mother. Susan shrank backward, her shoulders hitting the edge of the mantel. I read the handwritten words aloud. "Rebecca, you must wire the next installment to Joan immediately. We cannot afford any delays. You have to keep funding this arrangement to hide Alyssa's mistake. If the neighbors find out what she did, her reputation will be destroyed. Do not fail us." The room plunged into a suffocating dead silence. The only sound remaining was the rhythmic ticking of the antique grandfather clock in the hallway, counting the seconds of their total destruction. The double impact of the medical record and the handwritten confession acted as a lethal combination. There was no escape hatch. There was no room left for clever spin, emotional manipulation, or gaslighting. The tangible evidence pinned them to the floorboards. Susan clamped her hands over her mouth, her eyes wide with unadulterated terror. Gary lowered his head, staring at the Persian rug, realizing his pristine suburban kingdom was reduced to ash. Alyssa curled into a tight ball on the far edge of the sofa, burying her face in her knees, whimpering softly. Nathan moved. He lunged out of the leather armchair. He snatched both papers from the glass coffee table, gripping the edges so tightly his knuckles turned white. He brought the documents close to his face, his eyes darting frantically between the raised brass notary seal and the undeniable cursive handwriting of the woman he almost called his mother-in-law. He read the truth. He absorbed the sheer, staggering magnitude of the marital coup they attempted to orchestrate. He looked up from the papers, his gaze shifting toward Alyssa, who sat weeping on the velvet cushions. The woman he viewed as a vibrant, honest alternative just 5 minutes ago now looked like a toxic, calculated liability. He realized she abandoned her own child, allowed her sister to shoulder the financial burden, and actively participated in a scheme to steal another woman's future. He looked at Susan and Gary, recognizing them not as loving parents, but as ruthless manipulators willing to sacrifice their eldest daughter on a public altar to protect their favorite child. Finally, he looked at me. The self-righteous hero complex evaporated from his posture. He stood in the center of the living room, holding the irrefutable evidence of his own profound foolishness. He wanted a convenient excuse to leave our relationship. He wanted a guilt-free exit visa. Instead, he just discovered he was the primary mark in a high-stakes con game, and he fell for the bait without asking a single intelligent question. The silence stretched, heavy and lethal, waiting for the inevitable explosion. The silence did not stretch for long. It shattered with the force of a detonated explosive. The carefully maintained facade of the Clark family disintegrated right in front of the stone fireplace. The panic was swift and feral. When cornered, narcissists do not apologize. They cannibalize each other to survive. Alyssa struck first. She leapt off the velvet sofa, her pastel sweater wrinkling as she pointed a manicured finger directly at our mother. The fragile, innocent persona she wore like a protective cloak vanished, replaced by the vicious, entitled core I had endured for decades. "You told me this would work!" my sister shrieked, her voice tearing through the quiet living room. "You promised me he would be mine. You said if I just played along, we could push her out and secure my future. You ruined everything." Susan recoiled, her hands fluttering defensively near her collarbone. Her pristine Midwestern manners dissolved into sheer, unadulterated desperation. "Alyssa, lower your voice right now," she pleaded. "We are trying to protect you. We did this for your benefit." "You destroyed my life," Alyssa yelled, tears of genuine fury spilling down her pale cheeks. She turned her venom toward our father, stepping across the Persian rug. "You both said the paper trail was gone. You stood in the kitchen and promised me Rebecca had zero proof left." Gary did not step forward to comfort his favorite child. The patriarch, a man who built his entire insurance career evaluating risk and denying liability, instantly threw his wife onto the sacrificial altar. His face flushed a dark, angry crimson, the veins in his neck bulging against his stiff collar. "I told you not to write anything down, Susan," Gary snarled, his baritone voice shaking the framed photographs resting on the mantel. "I warned you about leaving a physical record. Writing that letter was a catastrophic miscalculation. You handed her the weapon on a silver platter." "I was securing the financial arrangement," Susan shrieked back, her eyes wide with panic. "Someone had to handle the logistics while you hid in your home office pretending none of this was happening. You are just as guilty." I stood perfectly still, clutching my leather tote, watching the people who raised me tear each other to shreds over a botched con game. It was a spectacular, horrifying display of moral bankruptcy. The people who demanded my loyalty for 31 years were currently demonstrating they possessed none of their own. Nathan stood amidst the crossfire, holding the faded yellow carbon copy and the handwritten confession. His chest heaved with rapid, shallow breaths. The color drained entirely from his face, leaving his skin the shade of cold ash. The pristine, logical data developer finally grasped the staggering scope of the deception. He realized he was not a righteous hero saving a damsel from a villainous sister. He was a gullible pawn, manipulated by a family of charlatans who viewed him as nothing more than a prestigious asset to be traded. He dropped the documents onto the glass coffee table as if the paper scorched his fingertips. The sheets fluttered down, coming to rest next to a stack of glossy lifestyle magazines. He turned toward me. The arrogant contempt he weaponized just 10 minutes ago was replaced by raw, suffocating panic. "Rebecca," he stammered, taking a hurried, unstable step in my direction. "I had no idea. I swear to you, I did not know they fabricated this ledger." He reached out, his hand grasping for my elbow, seeking the comfortable, familiar anchor he had relied on for 2 years. He wanted the workhorse to fix the disaster. He wanted the peacekeeper to smooth over the rough edges, absorb the trauma, and forgive his profound lapse in judgment. I stepped backward, pulling my arm swiftly out of his reach. The physical rejection hit him hard. He stumbled slightly, his eyes pleading for a lifeline I refused to throw. "I was lied to," Nathan pleaded, his voice cracking under the weight of his own foolishness. "They presented me with bank statements. They twisted the entire narrative while I was vulnerable. Please, you have to understand my position. We can fix this. We can walk out of here right now, together, and never speak to them again." "You are not a victim, Nathan," I replied, my tone dropping to a sub-zero register. "You did not ask for my side of the story. You did not demand empirical evidence. You wanted an exit visa. You wanted a convenient excuse to pursue the shiny object sitting on the sofa. And you eagerly accepted the first piece of fiction that handed you the keys." His shoulders slumped. He opened his mouth to formulate another defense, but I cut him off. I reached into the dark interior of my leather tote bag one final time. I bypassed the empty manila folder and retrieved the thick, cream-colored envelope I carried away from the country club earlier that afternoon. I held it up, letting the expensive stationery catch the warm glow of the living room lamps. The heavy paper represented the final nail in the coffin. My family did not orchestrate this coup alone, I announced, shifting my gaze from the panicked fiancé to the warring parents. The rot extends much further than this suburban living room. I unsealed the envelope. I pulled out the crisp certified bank check and the legal contract printed on premium stock. I walked toward the center of the coffee table. A decorative, three-wick cedar candle burned brightly next to a ceramic vase. The flames flickered, casting long shadows across the polished glass. "Your mother summoned me for a private lunch today, Nathan," I explained, maintaining fierce, unrelenting eye contact. Carol was fully aware of the child. She knew Leo belonged to Alyssa the entire time, but Carol views me as a threat. She despises my independence and my career. She struck a silent bargain with my parents because she desires a pliable, superficial daughter-in-law she can control, like a puppet. Nathan shook his head, his eyes widening in horror as the final pieces of the puzzle slammed into place. My mother would never do that. She would never align with them. She drafted a non-disclosure agreement, I continued, holding the thick contract up for him to read the bold legal header. And she offered me $50,000 to break our engagement and relocate to another state quietly. I picked up the certified bank check. The zeros stared back at me, a numeric representation of their shared arrogance. I held the edge of the stiff paper directly over the open flame of the decorative candle. The fire caught the corner instantly. The orange flame curled upward, eating through the crisp paper, turning the printed numbers and the authorized signature into black, curling ash. The scent of burning ink and melting paper filled the room, overpowering the citrus floor wax. I held the burning bribe until the intense heat neared my fingertips, watching the generational wealth turn to useless dust. I dropped the flaming remnants onto the glass coffee table, right beside the legal contract and the faded hospital records. "Your mother bought Alyssa for you," I said coldly, watching the last embers die out on the glass surface. "Enjoy each other." The poetic justice unfolding in that room was a masterpiece of karmic retribution. Nathan stared at the charred remains of his mother's bribe. The illusion of his elite, honorable upbringing shattered alongside the Clark family facade. He realized the women in his life viewed him as a prize to be managed, manipulated, and traded behind his back. He looked at Alyssa. The golden child was weeping hysterically on the velvet cushions, her white lace dress looking absurd and pathetic in the aftermath of her exposed treachery. Alyssa scrambled to her feet, reaching out toward Nathan with desperate, shaking hands. She tried to salvage the wreckage. "Nathan, please. I do care about you. We can still be together. My mother forced me into this scheme. I never wanted to hurt you." Nathan recoiled from her touch, his features twisting into a mask of pure revulsion. He looked at the girl he had considered a vibrant, honest alternative just an hour ago. He saw nothing but a hollow, manipulative shell who abandoned her own flesh and blood to preserve her social standing, willing to destroy her own sister for a temporary upgrade in lifestyle. "Do not touch me," Nathan growled, his voice vibrating with intense disgust. "You sicken me. All of you sicken me." He turned his back on the golden child. He did not look at Susan, who was trembling against the mantel, or Gary, who stared blankly at the ruined coffee table. Nathan marched toward the heavy oak front door, twisted the deadbolt, and walked out into the cold night. He slammed the door behind him with enough force to rattle the bay windows, severing his ties to the Clark household permanently. Alyssa collapsed onto the floor, sobbing uncontrollably into the Persian rug. The wealthy fiancé she schemed to steal was gone forever. The pristine reputation she guarded so fiercely was obliterated. She was permanently trapped in a toxic house with the parents who engineered her downfall, facing a future where everyone in their social circle would eventually uncover the dark truth of her abandoned son. The golden child was reduced to a pariah, choked by the very leash her parents tied around her neck. I stood in the center of the devastation, breathing in the crisp scent of burnt paper and cedar smoke. I surveyed the room one last time. I felt no sorrow. I felt no lingering attachment to the people weeping in the shadows of the living room. The heavy, suffocating burden I carried for 3 decades was finally lifted from my shoulders. I raised my left hand. I gripped the diamond engagement ring resting on my fourth finger. The platinum band felt heavy and cold. It slid off with ease, no longer representing a fortress of safety, but a shackle I had willingly worn to appease a family that despised my strength. I dropped the diamond ring onto the glass coffee table. It landed with a sharp, final ping, coming to rest against the charred remnants of the bribe and the faded medical records. I did not offer a farewell speech. The evidence spoke for itself. I turned around, gripped the handles of my leather tote, and walked out the front door, leaving the wreckage of 2 toxic empires burning quietly in the dark. It has been exactly 6 months since I left my platinum engagement ring resting on the glass coffee table to burn alongside the ruins of my family. The crisp Minnesota spring air feels vastly different in my lungs now. It feels remarkably clean. For 3 decades, I inhaled the suffocating smog of suburban anxiety, always bracing my shoulders for the next disaster I would be commanded to mitigate. Today, I step out onto my apartment balcony holding a ceramic mug of hot black coffee. I watch the morning frost melt off the towering pine trees, listening to the distant hum of morning traffic, and I simply breathe. I am 31 years old, and for the first historic period in my existence, my schedule belongs entirely to me. The immediate days following the ambush required precise, clinical execution. I dismantled the upcoming nuptials with the same ruthless efficiency I apply to hospital triage protocols. I contacted the upscale caterers, the historic venue coordinators, and the boutique photographers. I informed them the event was officially terminated. I did not offer dramatic explanations or seek pity from strangers over the phone. I merely requested the applicable contract refunds and closed the ledgers. During that chaotic week of untangling my life from Nathan, my phone screen illuminated with a familiar, wealthy caller identification. Carol Reed, the imposing matriarch who tried to buy my silence for $50,000, possessed the staggering audacity to leave 3 separate voicemails on my private line. I listened to her first audio message while driving to the grocery store. Her tone lacked its previous icy, country club superiority. Instead, she adopted a warm, conciliatory rhythm. She commended my resilience. She stated that my ability to stand my ground in that living room proved I possessed the exact fortitude required to thrive within her elite circle. She actually suggested we meet for a private brunch to discuss a fresh start, hinting that her son was miserable and desperately needed my stable guidance. I did not return her call. I tapped the screen, selected her contact profile, and permanently blocked her number, severing the Reed empire from my orbit forever. Carol only respected power. The moment I demonstrated my strength, she wanted to harness it to manage her weak son and secure her legacy. I refused to trade one toxic, manipulative matriarch for another. The social fallout within my own bloodline unfolded exactly as I predicted. You cannot cancel a high-profile, expensive wedding 3 weeks before the ceremony without generating intense scrutiny. The extended relatives began asking probing questions. My aunts, uncles, and cousins demanded to know why Nathan walked away. Susan and Gary attempted to spin a polite fiction about mutual differences, but lies require coordination, and their household was fractured beyond repair. The truth breached their defenses, fracturing their pristine facade. Word traveled through the tight-knit suburban network with the terrifying speed of a prairie fire. The extended family discovered the reality about the young boy living up in Duluth. They learned that the flawless younger sister birthed a child and callously cast him aside to protect her carefree lifestyle, while simultaneously allowing the older sibling to shoulder the crushing financial ruin. Alyssa lost her golden halo overnight. The pedestal my parents meticulously built for her crumbled into dust. She became a social pariah within the local community. Her curated internet presence collapsed as the humiliating gossip infiltrated her peer group. Without my constant protection shielding her from reality, she finally had to face the severe consequences of her vanity. She remains trapped inside that sprawling colonial house, suffocating under the weight of the parents who engineered her demise. They are all locked inside a prison of their own making, blaming each other for the ashes. Susan and Gary did not surrender easily. Narcissists never let their primary resource walk away without launching a desperate campaign to drag them back into servitude. Because I blocked their digital communications, they resorted to archaic methods. Every few weeks, a pristine envelope arrives in my metal mailbox. I always recognize the looping, cursive handwriting belonging to my mother. Sometimes the letters are thick, filled with what I safely assume are weeping apologies and manipulative pleas recalling fond childhood memories. Other times, the envelopes bear the return address of my father's insurance firm, likely containing formal requests to discuss urgent family estate planning. I never break the wax seals. I walk straight from the mailroom to the recycling bin, dropping the unopened envelopes directly into the paper waste. Society often conditions women to believe that cutting ties with family represents an act of profound cruelty. We are taught that blood demands unconditional forgiveness, no matter how deep the wounds penetrate or how many times the knife twists. I reject that philosophy entirely. Enforcing a strict no-contact rule is not a weapon I wield to punish my parents. It is a suit of armor I wear to protect my own peace. I am not trying to teach them a moral lesson, because people who orchestrate marital coups are biologically incapable of learning. I am simply closing a sturdy door to a house that was burning down, refusing to let their toxic smoke fill my new lungs. Redirecting the vast reserves of energy I used to spend managing my family yielded staggering results. Without the constant, draining demands of the workhorse role, my professional capacity expanded exponentially. I threw myself into my career at the healthcare facility. I streamlined the billing departments, negotiated highly favorable vendor contracts, and resolved staffing conflicts with a sharp, clear focus. I no longer apologized for taking up space. Last month, the regional director called me into the executive boardroom. They recognized the tangible, statistical improvements in the clinic operations under my supervision. I walked out of that meeting with a monumental promotion, stepping into the role of Regional Operations Director. The new title came equipped with a salary increase that guaranteed my permanent financial independence. To commemorate the milestone, I visited a luxury jeweler in the downtown commercial district. I carried a cashier check containing the salvage deposits refunded from my canceled wedding. I did not buy a decorative trinket. I requested a specific highly engineered timepiece. The clerk handed me a stunning silver and sapphire chronograph watch. I fastened the cool metal band around my left wrist, placing it exactly where a diamond engagement ring used to sit. The instrument carries significant weight, grounding me in the present moment. Every time I glance down to check the hour, I watch the intricate, sweeping gears moving beneath the scratch-resistant sapphire glass. It serves as a daily, tangible reminder. My time, my income, and my fierce loyalty no longer belong to ungrateful relatives or a gullible fiancé. They belong exclusively to me. My life is finally secure. Yet, as I look at the polished silver ticking on my wrist, a lingering shadow creeps into the edge of my mind. I escaped the trap, but I left someone else behind in the blast radius. The adults in this tragic narrative faced the consequences of their actions. Alyssa lost her social standing. My parents lost their favored reputation. Nathan lost a loyal partner. Carol Reed lost control. But there is one person residing 3 hours north who committed no crimes, told no lies, and played no games. Leo is 8 years old. He is growing up in a drafty house near Lake Superior, raised by an aunt who accepted a bribe to keep him hidden. He shares the DNA of a mother who views him as a shameful secret and grandparents who treat his existence as a liability. The peacekeeper inside me is dead, but the protector is very much alive. I cannot simply walk away and allow the generational curse to consume an innocent child. I need to formulate a legal strategy to secure his future, and I need to execute it without ever letting my family know I am the one pulling the strings. 12 months evaporated since the collapse of my former life. The Minnesota landscape shifted once again, trading the humid summer heat for a brilliant, biting autumn. I settled into my role as Regional Operations Director with a relentless, focused drive. My financial portfolio expanded. My apartment felt serene, and the silver chronograph on my wrist ticked in perfect, uninterrupted rhythm. My days consisted of managing hospital logistics, streamlining budgets, and returning home to a quiet sanctuary. I no longer spent my weekends putting out fires for ungrateful relatives. Yet, a solitary thread remained untethered in the back of my mind. It happened on a brisk Tuesday afternoon. I left the clinic early to grab a hot espresso near a suburban recreational park, needing a brief respite from fluorescent office lighting. I parked my sedan near the playground perimeter. Children swarmed the jungle gym, their laughter ringing through the crisp chill. The wind whipped dry oak leaves across the pavement. I leaned against my car door, sipping the dark roast, letting the biting air clear my head. A specific profile caught my eye. A young boy sat on a wooden swing, kicking the wood chips beneath his sneakers. His sandy blonde hair blew across his forehead. He possessed a familiar slope in his shoulders, a physical echo I recognized instantly. It was Leo. He was 9 years old now. He did not look joyful or energetic. He looked isolated, radiating the specific, quiet melancholy of a child who understands he is a burden. He watched a father push a younger girl on the adjacent swing set, his expression hollow and resigned. Sitting on a nearby park bench, scrolling mindlessly through a smartphone, was a young woman wearing a university sweatshirt. A hired caregiver, not Aunt Joan, who likely deemed the growing boy too exhausting for her aging joints. Certainly not Alyssa. My sister resided mere miles away, yet she outsourced her biological responsibilities to an hourly employee. The former golden child possessed zero maternal instinct. She viewed this boy as a public relations disaster, a stain she successfully hid from her social circle. My parents viewed him as a monthly expense, a leaking pipe they wrapped in cash to prevent structural damage to their reputation. I watched him drag his sneakers through the dirt, his head bowed. A heavy, aching sorrow pooled in my chest. If I did nothing, Leo would inherit the toxic dysfunction I just escaped. Susan and Gary would eventually manipulate him, teaching him that love is transactional and conditional. Alyssa would ignore him, punishing him for ruining her pristine youth. Aunt Joan would raise him with cold indifference. When he reached adulthood, he would lack the resources to flee their orbit. They would mold him into another draft horse, grooming him to fix their mistakes and carry their secrets. I could not let that happen, but I also refused to break my strict boundary. Approaching the swing set meant interacting with the caregiver, which meant alerting Joan, which guaranteed Susan would discover my presence. Reopening communication offered my mother a foothold, a tiny crack in the fortress door. She would immediately try to pry open with manipulative letters and weeping voicemails. I required a ghost operation. I needed to act as a shield without ever letting them see the metal. The following morning, I scheduled an appointment with a premier estate attorney located in a high-rise tower overlooking the Minneapolis skyline. I bypassed the suburban boutique firms my father utilized for his insurance brokerage. I chose a meticulous litigator named Benjamin Sullivan, a man known for crafting impenetrable corporate contracts. I sat across from Benjamin in his glass-walled office. The room smelled of expensive leather and polished wood. The muted hum of the city traffic buzzed 60 floors below. I unzipped my tote and slid a cashier check across the mahogany table. The paper contained a staggering sum, compiled from my executive bonuses and strategic investments over the past year. I laid out my precise, uncompromising conditions. I wanted to establish an educational trust for a minor child, and I needed the contract to be entirely bulletproof. I dictated the parameters with clinical exactness. The funds were locked. The capital generated interest, untouched until his 18th birthday. Benjamin typed the stipulations into his legal software, his brow furrowed in deep concentration. He paused, looking over the rim of his glasses. "You realize this is exceptionally restrictive," Benjamin noted, his tone laced with professional curiosity. "Even in a medical emergency, the current legal guardian cannot access these funds. You are creating a fortress around this money." "They have their own resources," I replied, my voice dead level. "This account is not designed to subsidize their daily lives. This is his escape hatch." I added the ironclad clauses. Aunt Joan could not withdraw a single cent for living expenses, groceries, or childcare. Susan and Gary possessed zero signatory authority. Alyssa was legally barred from requesting disbursements. If anyone sharing my bloodline attempted to access the account, or if they tried to coerce the boy into signing the funds over, the trust automatically triggered a hostile legal defense clause, freezing the assets and alerting a third-party fiduciary. The money could only be routed directly to accredited universities, vocational schools, or certified housing administrators. It covered tuition, textbooks, and board. It guaranteed Leo a ticket out of his miserable circumstance. It handed him the financial autonomy to walk away from the people who abandoned him, ensuring he never had to beg his grandparents for a loan or rely on his absent mother for survival. Benjamin printed the thick stack of legal directives. He handed me a heavy fountain pen. The brass casing felt cool against my fingertips. I reviewed the text line by line, ensuring my parents were permanently blocked from the ledger. Every loophole was sealed. Every potential avenue for extortion was severed. As I pressed the ink into the signature line, a profound wave of closure washed over my soul. This stroke of a pen represented the ultimate, undeniable truth. My family spent months painting me as a callous, cold-hearted monster who discarded an infant to protect my own selfish ambitions. They convinced a gullible fiancé I was a villain devoid of empathy. Yet, sitting in a skyscraper miles away from their toxicity, I was the only individual securing the boy's future. I expected no gratitude. Leo would never know I funded his escape route. He would turn 18, receive a certified letter from a nameless trust, and walk out the front door. I required no applause, no tearful reunions, and no public validation. True protection operates in the shadows, asking for nothing in return. I handed the signed portfolio back to the attorney. I shook his hand, picked up my bag, and walked out of the suite. The elevator descended rapidly toward the street level. I stepped through the revolving glass doors into the bustling city. The afternoon sun broke through the gray clouds, warming the concrete sidewalks. The air felt incredibly light. The generational curse stopped with me. I broke the cycle of manipulation, secrecy, and conditional love. I left the ghosts of my past permanently trapped in their own burning house, while I stepped forward into a future I built with my own two hands. The aroma of roasted garlic, rosemary, and warm bread fills the air of my dining room on a brisk Friday evening. The space is illuminated by soft amber string lights draped across the ceiling beams, casting a warm, inviting glow over the gathered crowd. The sounds bouncing off the brick walls of my Minneapolis loft are a chaotic, beautiful symphony. I hear the deep, booming laughter of David, my next-door neighbor who helped me move my heavy bookshelves 6 months ago. I hear the sharp, witty banter of Zara, the lead triage nurse from the healthcare clinic, telling a ridiculous story about a misplaced shipment of medical bandages. Clinking wine glasses harmonize with the steady rhythm of a jazz record spinning on the turntable in the corner. I stand near the edge of the kitchen island, leaning against the cool quartz countertop, holding a glass of dry red wine. I watch the scene unfold before me, absorbing the sheer, unfiltered joy radiating from the room. There is no formal seating chart tonight. I did not spend 3 hours agonizing over which personality type needed to be buffered by a neutral third party. The chairs surrounding the long, reclaimed wood dining table are mismatched, gathered from thrift stores and antique shops. People sit wherever the conversation pulls them. There is no head of the table. There is no patriarchal figure demanding silence before delivering a self-important toast. There is no matriarch scanning the room to catalog perceived slights or improper utensil usage. More importantly, there is no golden child demanding the spotlight. When Sarah finishes her story, the room erupts in genuine applause, and the attention organically shifts to someone else. Nobody sulks in the corner because they are not receiving an adequate amount of praise. Nobody weaponizes a compliment to diminish another guest. If someone accidentally spills a drop of Pinot Noir onto the linen runner, the room does not freeze in terror. We do not brace for an explosive lecture regarding clumsiness or a passive-aggressive sigh that ruins the remainder of the evening. David simply grabs a cloth napkin, dabs the spill, makes a self-deprecating joke, and the dinner continues without a single disruption. This is what a healthy ecosystem looks like. This is my chosen family. For 3 decades, I believed the lie that DNA dictated loyalty. I operated under the assumption that sharing a bloodline bound you to a specific chair at a specific table, regardless of how many splinters that chair drove into your skin. I endured the Clark household dynamic because society conditions us to view family as an inescapable, permanent assignment. You are taught to endure the slights, overlook the manipulation, and act as the bigger person. I despise that phrase now. Being the bigger person is merely a convenient slogan invented by toxic individuals to enforce your compliance. It is a demand that you absorb their damage without complaining, thereby preserving their comfort at the direct expense of your own sanity. I step away from the kitchen island and walk toward the large industrial windows overlooking the city skyline. The glass is cold against my fingertips. I look out at the grid of streetlights stretching across the Minnesota landscape, and I want to speak directly to you. If you are listening to my story and recognizing the heavy, exhausting armor I used to wear, I need you to pause and evaluate your current surroundings. Perhaps you are the workhorse in your own family. Perhaps you are the designated fixer, the one everyone calls when the bank accounts run dry, when the secrets threaten to spill over, or when the golden sibling requires a rescue mission. You answer the phone. You pay the invoices. You swallow your pride, bite your tongue, and translate their blatant disrespect into harmless quirks. You convince yourself that your endless sacrifices will eventually purchase their genuine respect. You believe that if you just solve one more crisis, they will finally look at you and acknowledge your worth. They will not. Narcissists do not issue receipts for your suffering. They do not view your boundaries as a healthy assertion of self-respect. They view your boundaries as a hostile insult to their authority. Your silence is not interpreted as grace. Your silence is interpreted as permission to continue utilizing you as a human shield. The peacekeeper trap is an invisible, suffocating cage. You stay inside it because the fear of the unknown feels far more terrifying than the familiar ache of rejection. You fear the retaliation, the smear campaigns, and the isolation that inevitably follows when you challenge their established order. My mother and father built an empire on the assumption that my fear of losing them outweighed my desire for the truth. They handed my fiancé a fabricated narrative, betting their entire legacy on the premise that I would cower in the shadows and accept the blame. They forgot one crucial detail. Truth is immune to manipulation, but it requires a willing messenger. I think about that unbending manila folder. I think about the faded yellow carbon paper resting at the bottom of a steel lockbox for 8 years. I think about the heavy brass notary stamp pressing a permanent, undeniable seal into the page. Those artifacts represented the ultimate reality, but they possessed zero leverage while locked inside a dark closet. Evidence only works when you carry it into the light. The truth is only as powerful as your willingness to lay it flat on the glass coffee table and let the chips fall wherever they may. When I finally dropped that folder in front of my father, I did not just expose a lie about my sister's abandoned child. I exposed the foundational rot of an entire generational system. I forced a pragmatic, data-driven tech developer to face the catastrophic flaw in his own judgment. I forced a manipulative country club matriarch to watch her $50,000 bribe turn to ash over a decorative candle. I lost my parents, my sister, my future in-laws, and the man I plan to marry, all within the span of a single evening. From the outside, that sounds like a profound, insurmountable tragedy. It was an extraction. It was the most liberating, triumphant moment of my existence. I turn back toward my dining room. The jazz record clicks into a new track. The laughter swells again. The silver chronograph watch on my left wrist catches the amber string lights, reminding me that my time is a precious, finite resource. I refuse to spend another second of it translating cruelty into love. You do not owe anyone your dignity. You do not owe your silence to protect the people who orchestrated your pain. Worth is not a badge assigned to you by a narcissistic parent, and love does not demand you shrink yourself to fit inside a room built on deception. If you are the one holding your family's dark secrets to keep the peace, ask yourself who you are really protecting. Drop a comment below if you have ever had to walk away from the table you were born at, and subscribe if you are finally ready to build your own. In America, particularly in the heartland of the Midwest, we are sold a very specific, deeply ingrained mythology regarding the traditional family. It is a portrait painted in the warm, forgiving hues of Sunday dinners, flawlessly manicured lawns, and an unshakable, silent loyalty. We are taught that the home is a sanctuary, a fortress designed to protect its inhabitants from the harsh realities of the outside world. Yet, as I reflect on the ashes left behind on the glass coffee table in the Clark family living room, I am struck by a haunting realization. Sometimes the most beautiful, structurally sound houses harbor the deepest, most insidious rot. Rebecca's journey is not merely a tale of a hijacked wedding or a stolen fiancé. It is a devastating, surgical autopsy of a catastrophic parenting failure. It forces us to peer behind the heavy velvet curtains of the American dream and to ask ourselves what we are actually building when we raise our children. At the core of the Clark family's implosion is a profound absence of fairness, revealing a toxic dynamic that destroys siblings from the inside out. Susan and Gary did not raise two daughters with equal emotional footing. They cast two distinct roles in a theatrical production designed to elevate their own social standing. Alyssa was molded into the golden child, the prized show pony shielded from the friction of reality. Rebecca was conscripted as the draft horse, conditioned from a young age to carry the heavy, unglamorous burdens of accountability. As parents, when we assign these rigid, inescapable identities to our children, we commit a silent act of theft. By protecting Alyssa from the natural consequences of her own choices, specifically the birth of her son, Leo, Susan and Gary robbed her of the opportunity to develop integrity. They taught her that her value lay entirely in her pristine image, creating an adult woman devoid of empathy and crippled by a shallow, fragile entitlement. Conversely, they taught Rebecca that her worth was purely transactional, measured only by the disasters she could quietly sweep away. They raised one daughter to be a predator and the other to be prey, wrapping the entire dynamic in the guise of maternal love. True family structure requires a foundation of radical honesty and acute emotional awareness. The Clarks, much like Carol Reed in her affluent country club Fortress, substituted these vital pillars with reputation management. The failure of parenting here transcends socioeconomic class. Whether operating in a suburban colonial or a high society estate, parents who lack emotional awareness view their children not as independent human beings, but as extensions of their own egos. When Alyssa found herself in a terrifying crisis at 20 years old, a healthy, emotionally attuned family would have drawn close. They would have offered guidance, structural support, and a path toward taking responsibility for a new life. Instead, Susan and Gary viewed their own grandson as a liability, a dark stain on their curated veneer. They weaponized deceit, forcing one daughter into exile and the other into a web of financial extortion. This represents the ultimate betrayal of parental duty. When we prioritize how our family appears to the neighbors over how our family actually functions behind closed doors, we raise children who do not know how to love. We raise children who only know how to perform. The masks we force them to wear eventually fuse to their skin, leaving them incapable of forming genuine, transparent connections with anyone else in the world, as evidenced by Alyssa's hollow, manipulative grasp at a stolen fiancé. The profound irony of this tragedy rests in the fact that the only person who demonstrated genuine, enduring parental responsibility was the very woman they tried to brand as a heartless monster. Rebecca's final silent act, establishing a legally impenetrable educational trust for her abandoned nephew, defines what long-term guidance truly means within a family. She did not seek a tearful reunion. She required no public validation or applause. She recognized a vulnerable child trapped in a cycle of generational dysfunction and quietly constructed an escape hatch for him. This is the essence of mature, protective love. It is not about enabling destructive behavior or maintaining proximity to toxic relatives. It is about taking concrete, selfless action to ensure the next generation possesses the tools to survive. Rebecca became the mother figure that her sister refused to be, and she executed this duty entirely in the shadows, proving that true family responsibility is measured by what you do when no one is watching. American culture constantly feeds us the narrative that blood is an unbreakable bond. We are bombarded with idioms insisting that family is everything, that we must forgive every trespass, and that loyalty to our parents supersedes our own psychological survival. But Rebecca's story demands that we challenge this conventional wisdom. We must embrace a far more difficult, uncomfortable truth. Shared DNA does not serve as a blank check for emotional abuse. Sometimes, the most profound act of love you can perform for a toxic family system is to refuse to participate in it any longer. By walking out of that locked living room and leaving her platinum engagement ring beside the charred remnants of a $50,000 bribe, Rebecca did not destroy her family. The family was already dead. She simply refused to continue propping up the corpses. We must redefine loyalty. Walking away from a table where you are being served poison is not an act of betrayal. It is an act of profound self-preservation. This narrative serves as a mirror, reflecting the quiet, suffocating compromises many of us make in the name of keeping the peace. If you find yourself translating cruelty into harmless quirks, or shrinking your own light so a favored sibling can shine, I urge you to listen to the lessons echoing from the Clark household. For more stories that peel back the complex layers of our deepest relationships and challenge the illusions we live by, I invite you to subscribe and follow Zara Told Stories. We continually explore the raw, unfiltered moments where individuals finally reclaim the pen and write their own endings. Think about the table where you sit for the holidays. Consider the heavy, brass-stamped truths you keep hidden in the dark corners of your own metaphorical lockbox, buried beneath years of silence just to ensure the dinner conversation remains polite and predictable. We spend decades terrified of the fire that might consume our relationships if we speak the undeniable truth, failing to realize that the smoke from our own silence is already suffocating us. The ultimate tragedy in this life is not losing a family that demands you diminish yourself in order to belong. The ultimate tragedy is keeping them and forgetting who you were before they told you who you were supposed to be. As you look at the people closest to you, ask yourself a quiet, terrifying question. Are the locks on your front door keeping the danger out, or are they quietly locking